The hospital bracelet was still on her wrist when I found her unconscious on the nursery floor. My daughter had been due any day. I'd cut my trip short just to be there for the birth, terrified I'd miss it by hours. My son-in-law met me at the door and said she'd lost the baby. Then told me to stop asking questions, as if grief came with a deadline. When the paramedic asked where the baby's body was, he smiled and locked the nursery door. That smile is the part I still can't explain. But let me start from the beginning. I'm grateful you're here. This story touches on family betrayal and resilience. It's not easy, but it matters. Before we start, drop a comment, where are you right now? And what time is it there? Just a note. Certain details are fictionalized for storytelling. The heart of this story is what I hope reaches you. My daughter lay unconscious on the hallway floor when I walked into her house that afternoon. One hand stretched toward the nursery door she would never reach. I had left Atlanta early to surprise Saskia. 3 weeks since she'd given birth, and I'd only managed brief hospital visits between board meetings. Today was supposed to be different. An afternoon with my daughter and my first real time holding my grandchild. The front door was unlocked. Saskia Townsend, 34 and meticulous as the director of operations she was at my company, never left doors unlocked. I called her name from the foyer. No answer. The house had that hollow quality of spaces where something has gone very wrong. I took the stairs 2 at a time. She was lying on her side in the upstairs hallway, still wearing yoga pants and an oversized sweater. Her face was pale, lips slightly parted, breathing shallow but present. A hospital discharge bracelet still circled her left wrist, the plastic band from 3 weeks ago when she delivered. Saskia, sweetheart, can you hear me? Nothing. I pressed 2 fingers to her neck, pulse steady but slow. Her skin was cool. I pulled out my phone. 911, what's your emergency? My daughter is unconscious. She just had a baby 3 weeks ago. I need an ambulance. I gave the address. Kept my hand on her shoulder. The operator asked questions I barely registered. Was she breathing? Yes. Any visible injuries? None. How long had she been lying there while I sat in an Atlanta conference room discussing freight margins? That's when the nursery door opened behind me. Stellan Lockwood, 37, emerged with the composure of a man discussing quarterly projections, not the father of a child he claimed had died. My son-in-law had always carried himself with careful precision. Harvard MBA, strategic thinking. The kind of son-in-law who looked good on paper. He'd joined Meridian Freight as VP of Development 2 years ago. Married Saskia 18 months later. Right now. Looking at his unnaturally calm expression, I wasn't sure what I'd gained. What happened here? I demanded. Where's the baby? Stellan closed the nursery door behind him. I heard the lock click. The baby's gone, he said, voice flat. He died. Saskia's just being dramatic about it. I stared at him. The 911 operator was still on my phone. I couldn't form words for several seconds. Dramatic. She's unconscious, Stellan. What the hell are you talking about? He slid his hands into his pockets like we were in a conference room instead of a hallway where his wife lay collapsed. It's been hard on her. The baby died a few days ago. She's not handling it well. The baby died. 4 words. Delivered like a weather report. I looked down at Saskia's wrist, at that hospital bracelet with its barcode and printed date. September 3rd, 2023, 3 weeks ago. Babies who die at birth don't come home with discharge bracelets. Mothers who lose infants in delivery don't wear the bands that prove a live birth occurred. If the baby died, I said slowly, watching his face. Why is she still wearing a discharge bracelet? Why isn't there a death certificate? Stellan's jaw tightened, the first crack in his manufactured calm. The hospital has the paperwork. I've been focused on taking care of Saskia. Taking care of her, she's unconscious on the floor. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Stellan glanced toward the stairs, and something in his expression shifted. Calculation. I stood up and moved toward the nursery door.
Open this door. Now!
Stellan stepped between me and the knob. There's nothing in there that will help. The paramedics will be here any minute. If the baby died, where is he? Where's the body? He didn't answer. Just stood there, blocking the door he'd locked, wearing the expression of a man who knew exactly what he was doing. 30 years building a company taught me to read people across boardroom tables, but I had never felt more certain about someone lying to my face. The front door burst open downstairs. Paramedics! Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. 2 EMTs appeared, kneeling beside Saskia with practiced efficiency. Blood pressure cuff. Penlight in her eyes. Questions I answered on autopilot. One of them looked at her hospital bracelet, then up at me. This is from 3 weeks ago. She gave birth September 3rd, at Novant Presbyterian. The paramedic exchanged a glance with his partner. They didn't ask why she was still wearing it, but I saw the question in their eyes. The same question crystallizing in my own mind. Stellan stayed by the locked nursery door while they carried Saskia down the stairs. I started to follow, then turned back. I'm going to the hospital with her. And when I come back, you're going to tell me what really happened. All of it. He met my eyes with that same flat calm. There's nothing to tell that I haven't already said. The click of the lock echoed as Stellan pocketed the key. My daughter was unconscious on a gurney. My grandchild was supposedly dead. And the only person who could explain any of it had just locked the one room that might hold answers. I looked down at where Saskia had been lying, at the faint outline her body had left in the hallway light, and realized whatever my son-in-law was hiding, it had started weeks ago. The paramedic's hand moved to Saskia's wrist in the ambulance, fingers finding her pulse, while his eyes tracked the hospital bracelet that had first caught my attention on her hallway floor. Vitals are stabilizing, Marcus Brennan said, adjusting the oxygen mask over her face. The lead paramedic had 20 years of emergency calls behind him, and recognized the look of a grandfather about to lose control. When did she give birth? This bracelet shows 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks and 2 days, I confirmed, watching the monitor beep steady rhythm beside her gurney. Her first child. Marcus exchanged a glance with his partner. They had asked about the baby at the house, standard protocol for recent mothers, and I'd repeated Stellan's claim about infant death. Neither paramedic had pressed for details, but I saw the questions in their professional silence. New mothers didn't typically end up unconscious on hallway floors 3 weeks postpartum. Novant Presbyterian Hospital's emergency entrance appeared through the windshield. The same hospital where Saskia had delivered. The same hospital that should have records of everything Stellan claimed had happened. They rushed her through automatic doors into controlled chaos. Nurses appeared. Questions flew. Saskia transferred from ambulance gurney to hospital bed with practiced efficiency. Someone asked about allergies. Someone else asked about current medications. I answered what I could, mostly, I don't know, and watched them wheel her behind curtains marked Treatment 4. I had flown to Atlanta to negotiate a $5 million contract, while someone was drugging my daughter and hiding my grandchild. A nurse handed me clipboard paperwork. Insurance information, emergency contacts, medical history. I filled it out mechanically, my mind circling one question: if the baby had died. Why wasn't there any evidence of grief? No funeral arrangements? No death certificate that Stellan could produce? Just that locked nursery door and his flat insistence that Saskia was being dramatic. Mr. Townsend? I looked up. Dr. Gideon Foster, the ER attending physician in his early 50s, pulled up Saskia's file with the efficient movements of someone who had delivered thousands of medical summaries to anxious families. Your daughter is stable, he said. We're running toxicology to determine what caused the unconscious episode. Her vitals are good, but we want to keep her for observation. Toxicology, I repeated. You think she was drugged? We need to rule out all possibilities. The paramedics noted she has a 3-week-old infant. Is the baby with family? This was it. The moment to voice what had been building since I'd seen Stellan's face. Doctor, I need to understand what happens when a newborn dies. My daughter's baby, her husband said she died. Dr. Foster's expression shifted, concern mixing with confusion. He glanced down at his tablet, swiped through several screens, then looked back at me. I'm sorry, Mr. Townsend, but there's no record of any infant mortality in your daughter's file. The ER noise beeping monitors. Overhead pages. Hurried conversations seemed to fade into background static. That's impossible, I said slowly. He told me she died. Where would that be documented? Here, in our system. Your daughter delivered at this hospital 3 weeks ago. September 3rd. Dr. Foster scrolled through the file, his frown deepening. I'm showing a normal postpartum discharge. Mother and infant both released in good health on September 5th. No complications. No readmission. No mortality report. No record. 2 words that turned everything Stellan had said into provable lies. Could it have been filed somewhere else? I heard myself ask, even though I already knew the answer. Another hospital? A home death? If an infant dies within 30 days of birth, it's reported to us and to the state. We would have the documentation. Dr. Foster's voice had gone careful, professional. Mr. Townsend, I think we need to involve someone from records and possibly hospital security. Can you wait here? I waited in a chair bolted to the ER floor while Dr. Foster made calls. Through the treatment curtain, I could hear nurses checking on Saskia, their voices low and efficient. My daughter was getting medical care. My grandson was somewhere unknown. Helen Whitmore arrived 15 minutes later. The hospital records administrator typed with practiced speed at the nurse's station computer, her expression growing more puzzled with each empty search result. I'm showing normal postpartum discharge for your daughter and infant, she confirmed, turning the monitor so I could see. No complications, no death certificate, no mortality report of any kind. Baby boy Townsend, born September 3rd at 2:47 a.m., 7 pounds 3 ounces, discharged with mother September 5th. Baby boy Townsend. My grandson had a weight, a time of birth, a discharge date. He had existed. He had been real. If an infant had died, Helen continued, there would be multiple records. Death certificate filed with the state. Hospital mortality report. Bereavement services documentation. I'm not finding any of those. What if someone falsified the information? I asked. What if the father claimed a death that didn't happen? Helen and Dr. Foster exchanged the kind of look that meant they were entering territory beyond routine medical inquiry. That would be, Helen said carefully, a police matter if my grandson hadn't died. Where was he right now? The question hung between us, unspoken but obvious. Dr. Foster cleared his throat. Mr. Townsend, I'm going to recommend we contact the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. If there's any question about an infant's welfare or location, they need to be involved immediately. I nodded, unable to form words. The computer screen showed Saskia's discharge summary in clinical detail. Mother, healthy. Infant, healthy. Both released to home care. 3 weeks ago, my grandson had left this hospital alive, which meant somewhere between that discharge and this evening, my son-in-law had made him disappear. The question wasn't whether Stellan had lied. It was what he had done with a 3-week-old baby. At midnight, I sat in the hospital cafeteria with Saskia's bracelet on the table between my hands, studying the barcode like it might decode the last 3 weeks of lies. The ER doctor had recommended police involvement hours ago. I'd nodded, said I'd call them in the morning, and watched him make a note in Saskia's chart about family concerns regarding infant welfare. But calling the police meant admitting I didn't know where my grandson was. It meant official reports and procedural delays and trusting strangers to find a 3-week-old baby before something irreversible happened. I wasn't ready to hand this over. Not yet. Not until I understood what I was handing them. Saskia was asleep 2 floors above me. Toxicology pending. Nurses checking her vitals every hour. Stable. Safe. I'd sat beside her bed until visiting hours ended, watching her breathe. Trying to reconcile the unconscious woman with the daughter who texted me daily updates about freight schedules and quarterly projections. Someone had done this to her. Someone had drugged her badly enough that she'd collapsed reaching for a nursery door. The bracelet felt like evidence. Patient ID number, barcode, discharge date printed in small black text. Saskia Lockwood, maternity. Discharged 9/5/2023. Somewhere in this city. My grandson was 3 weeks old and I had never held him. 3 weeks, I said aloud to the empty cafeteria. She wore this home with a healthy baby and came back unconscious without one. Every hospital transaction generates a paper trail. Births especially. If my grandson had been born here, there would be records beyond the basic discharge summary Helen Whitmore had shown me. Newborn screening results, pediatric exams, birth certificate filing. The kind of documentation that proved existence in ways a verbal claim never could. I left the cafeteria and found the records office. Night shift meant skeleton crew, but the lights were still on behind frosted glass. Angela Marsh, the night shift records clerk, looked up when I knocked. She'd worked hospital midnights for 12 years and recognized the look of a family member who wouldn't stop searching until they found answers. "Mr. Townsend," she said, glancing at the visitor badge I still wore. "It's late. Is your daughter all right?" "She's stable, but I need to see her complete maternity record." I placed the bracelet on her desk. "This is her patient ID from discharge." Angela picked up the bracelet, studied the numbers, then looked at me with professional caution. "Maternity records are confidential, even for family. I'd need—" "My daughter is unconscious in the ER," I said quietly. "Her husband told me their baby died. The hospital has no death certificate. I need to know what happened 3 weeks ago when she left this building." She held my gaze for a long moment, then turned to her computer. "That'll pull up everything from admission through postpartum. One moment." The screen loaded a photograph, a newborn in Saskia's arms. Timestamp, 4:15 a.m., 3 weeks ago. I stopped breathing. My daughter looked exhausted and radiant in equal measure. Hair pulled back, hospital gown slightly askew, holding a swaddled infant against her chest. The baby's face was visible, dark hair. Eyes closed. Expression peaceful, real, alive, documented. "Baby boy," Angela read from the screen. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, delivered at 2:47 a.m., all scores normal, pediatric exam cleared for discharge. Mother and infant released together September 5th at 11:20 a.m. I reached out and touched the monitor, my finger on the image of my grandson's face. "Can you scroll down?" My voice came out rough. Angela navigated through the file. Newborn footprints tiny, perfect, inked onto official form. APGAR scores at 1 minute and 5 minutes, both excellent. Pediatrician notes about feeding and jaundice screening. Discharge instructions for infant care, signed by Saskia. Every page was evidence. Every timestamp was proof. My grandson had been born healthy, examined by doctors, photographed by nurses, cleared for home care. He had existed in this building 3 weeks ago, documented in multiple systems by multiple professionals. "Is there a birth certificate?" I asked. Angela clicked to another screen. "Filed with North Carolina Vital Records the day after delivery, standard protocol. Would you like me to print it?" "Yes, all of it. Every page." "How do you register your daughter's birth and then make her disappear?" The printer hummed to life. Angela collected pages as they emerged to delivery summary. Newborn screening results, pediatric clearance, and finally, the birth certificate. She handed me the stack, and I spread them across her desk like evidence at a crime scene. The birth certificate sat on top. North Carolina state seal embossed across the bottom. Baby boy, born September 3rd at 2:47 a.m. Mother, Saskia Lockwood. Father, Stellan Lockwood. And there, in the section for infant's legal name, a name I'd never heard spoken aloud. My grandson had a name. Stellan had given him a name when he was hours old. The birth certificate shows the father's signature here, Angela said, pointing to a section at the bottom. Stellan Lockwood. He registered the baby's name himself. I stared at the signature. Confident. Legible. Official. He had stood in this hospital 3 weeks ago. Held his son. Signed his legal name into state records. Acknowledged paternity in government documents. You couldn't claim ignorance about a child you'd personally registered with the state. Can you print this? All of it, I repeated. Of course. But Mr. Townsend, Angela hesitated. If there's a concern about this child's welfare, you should contact authorities. I will, I said, watching the printer produce a second copy of the birth certificate. But first I need to understand what I'm reporting. The birth certificate sat in my hands. State seal embossed across the bottom. Baby boy. Born alive. Father's signature. Stellan Lockwood. Unmistakable and undeniable. He'd acknowledged this child before the state of North Carolina and then systematically erased him from existence. The question now was whether he had acted alone. Stellan slid a manila folder across the cafeteria table on the morning of the third day, and I knew before opening it that whatever was inside would be carefully constructed lies. I had spent 2 nights in this hospital. Saskia remained sedated upstairs, while toxicology ran panels I didn't fully understand. The birth certificate sat in my briefcase, state seal. Father's signature. Proof that everything Stellan claimed was fiction. And now my son-in-law sat across from me, looking like a man about to make a business presentation. We need to talk about something, he said. About the baby. I didn't touch the folder. I already know about the baby. Born healthy. Discharged healthy. Registered by you personally. Stellan's jaw tightened just a fraction. Just enough to confirm I'd hit something he hadn't expected. Then the composure returned. Smooth as practiced testimony. I had a DNA test done, he said, tapping the folder. The results came back. He wasn't mine. Silence stretched between us. Around us, the cafeteria carried on, coffee machines hissing, trays clattering, exhausted medical staff grabbing breakfast between shifts. Normal hospital morning sounds. Nothing about this conversation was normal. You signed his birth certificate, I said quietly. I have a copy. I signed it before I knew. Before the test. When the results came back and showed 0 paternity match, He paused, recalibrating. I made the decision to step back. For everyone's sake. He had signed a birth certificate 3 weeks ago and now sat across from me, denying his own signature mattered. I opened the folder. Genesis Testing Lab letterhead, professional formatting, clinical language describing DNA comparison analysis. According to this document, Stellan Lockwood showed 0 genetic markers matching the infant tested. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. Report dated 4 days after the baby's birth. You ordered this test when he was 4 days old, I said, reading the date. I had reasons to question paternity. The results confirmed my concerns. And then you what decided? The baby you'd registered with the state simply didn't exist anymore? Stellan stood up. I'm trying to be honest with you. Saskia had an affair. The baby wasn't mine. When she realized I knew, she became unstable. That's why I've been handling things the way I have. Every word was calibrated. Every pause was strategic. I was watching a man build a narrative in real time, adjusting based on what I revealed I knew. "Where is the baby now?" I asked. He met my eyes with that same flat calm I'd seen 3 days ago at the locked nursery door. "I don't know. Saskia made arrangements. You'd have to ask her." Then he left. And I sat alone with a folder full of fabricated science. Daria Finch arrived that evening. She found me in the main lobby, where I'd gone to make calls about Saskia's medical leave from Meridian. Daria had joined the company as CFO only 4 months earlier, a meteoric rise from lab technician to executive that Stellan had personally championed through the hiring process. I had approved the hire based on her MBA and his recommendation, thinking I was gaining financial leadership. Now I wondered what I'd actually gained. "Mr. Townsend," she said, extending her hand. 32, polished, professional in a way that felt rehearsed rather than natural. "The board asked me to check on Saskia. How is she?" "Stable. Still running tests. Terrible situation. Stellan's been keeping us updated. Of course. But I wanted to see if there's anything the company can do. Medical leave paperwork. Insurance coordination." "Stellan's been keeping you updated," I repeated. "I'm sure." Something flickered across her expression. Too fast to name, too deliberate to miss. That's when Stellan appeared in the lobby. He crossed from the elevator bank toward the exit, spotted us, changed trajectory, and in the 3 seconds it took him to reach where we stood. I watched their body language tell a story their words never would. Their hands touched for less than a second. It told me everything. Not a handshake, not a professional greeting, a touch that lingered at the fingertips, a glance held half a beat too long. Shoulders angled toward each other in a way that spoke of practiced intimacy, trying to masquerade as casual professionalism. "Daria," Stellan said, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Board asked me to coordinate Saskia's medical leave." Her voice was steady, but her neck had flushed pink. "We should coordinate on her paperwork. Do you have a moment?" They walked toward the coffee shop together. Professional colleagues discussing administrative details. Except professional colleagues didn't touch like that. They didn't look at each other like they were alone in a room when standing in a hospital lobby. I waited until they disappeared around the corner, then retrieved the DNA folder from my briefcase. Genesis Testing Lab. The logo was distinctive. A double helix twisted into a corporate symbol. Contact information listing a Charlotte address. I'd glanced at it this morning and dismissed it as generic medical laboratory branding. Now I stared at it and thought about Daria's resume. She'd come to Meridian 4 months ago with an MBA and 6 years of industry experience. Industry experience as a senior laboratory technician. At a company whose name I'd seen somewhere in her personnel file. "Genesis Testing Lab," I said aloud to the empty corridor. Where have I seen that before? I pulled out my phone and opened the Meridian HR portal. Daria Finch, Chief Financial Officer. Employment history. Genesis Testing Lab, Senior Laboratory Technician. 2017 to 2023. 6 years. Right up until Stellan hired her as our CFO despite having 0 executive experience. The logo on the DNA report matched the logo on her former employer's website. How long had they been planning this? The folder felt heavier in my hands now. Genesis Testing Lab. Daria Finch, Chief Financial Officer. Formerly Senior Lab Technician for 6 years at the same facility that had conveniently produced DNA results denying Stellan's paternity. My son-in-law hadn't acted alone. He had an accomplice with both motive and technical expertise. The question was whether they were hiding a baby or planning something worse. When my daughter's eyes opened on the 4th day, the first thing I felt was relief, and the second was dread for the question I knew was coming. I had spent the night researching Genesis Testing Lab, tracing Daria's employment timeline, building a mental case file that connected lab technician to fabricated DNA results to missing infant. The conspiracy had shaped now 2 people, coordinated timing, professional expertise. What I didn't have was proof strong enough to confront them. Or more critically, the location of a 3-week-old baby who had been hidden for 4 days. Saskia's fingers moved first. Then her eyes fluttered, opened, focused on the ceiling. She turned her head slowly, saw me in the chair beside her bed. "Dad." Her voice came out rough. "Unused. Where am I?" "You're in the hospital." I stood up, moved closer, fought the urge to hold her hand too tightly. "You've been unconscious. You're safe now." Her brow furrowed. "I don't understand. What happened?" "What do you remember?" She closed her eyes, and I watched her mentally retrace steps backward through darkness. "I was home. The baby was sleeping. I was so tired. I haven't slept more than 2 hours straight since—" She stopped, opened her eyes. "How long have I been here?" 3 days. They found sedatives in your system. High dose. I had held her as a newborn 34 years ago in a hospital room not unlike this one. "Sedatives," she repeated. "I didn't take anything. I was nursing. I wouldn't—" Memory clicked into place behind her eyes. "Stellan gave me water. He said I looked exhausted, that I should rest for a few hours while he watched the baby. He handed me a glass." My pulse kicked up. This was it. The moment she connected cause to effect. "After I drank it." Saskia's voice went distant, remembering. "Everything started spinning. It happened so fast." The room tilted and I tried to stand up, but my legs wouldn't work. I remember trying to get to the nursery. I needed to check on her. Then nothing. What was in that water? She looked at me like the question didn't make sense. Like her husband handing her drugged water was outside the realm of possibility her brain could process. "I don't know," she whispered. "It tasted normal. Maybe a little bitter. I thought it was just tap water that had been sitting too long." Bitter. The word hung between us. I thought about toxicology reports still pending. About how many common sedatives left bitter traces. About how a man could watch his wife drink poison and call it care. "The doctor said you were found on the hallway floor," I said carefully. "Near the nursery." I was trying to reach her. I remember that. I kept thinking I needed to check if she was breathing, if she needed to eat. New mom anxiety. You know, even drugged out of my mind, I just needed— Saskia stopped mid-sentence. Her hand moved to the hospital blanket, gripped it, and I saw the moment realization crash through whatever mental fog remained. "Where's my baby?" 4 words that stopped my heart. Dad. Where is she? Where's my baby? This was the choice I'd been dreading since her eyes opened. Truth or protection? Immediate honesty or strategic silence? I could tell her that Stellan had lied, that hospital records proved the baby was alive, that I suspected conspiracy and kidnapping, and an affair with our company's CFO. I could hand her that horror while she was barely conscious, still weak from days of sedation. Or I could give myself time to find answers before she had to carry this weight. "She's being taken care of," I said. The lie felt like swallowing glass. "You need to focus on getting better right now." "What do you mean being taken care of? Where? With who?" Panic edged into her voice. She tried to sit up, and monitors beeped in protest. "I want to see her." "Bring her to me. Please." "Saskia, listen to me." I put my hand over hers, steadied my voice into something that sounded like calm authority instead of manufactured composure. "You were unconscious for 3 days. Your body needs recovery time. The baby is safe, but you're not strong enough yet to—" "Not strong enough, I'm her mother. I need to see my daughter. Now." A nurse appeared in the doorway, drawn by the monitor alarms and raised voices. "Everything okay in here?" "Fine," I said. "She just woke up. She's disoriented." The nurse moved to Saskia's bedside, checking vitals with practiced efficiency. "Mrs. Lockwood, you need to stay calm. Your blood pressure is spiking. Deep, breaths. Saskia looked between us, and I watched her read the situation, two adults managing her, deflecting her questions, treating her like someone too fragile for truth. Her expression shifted from panic to something harder. Calculation. "Where's Stellan?" she asked. "I'll call him," the nurse offered. "Let him know you're awake." "No." The word came out sharp. Saskia's eyes locked on mine. "I want to talk to my father. Alone." "How do you tell your daughter that her husband drugged her and stole her child?" The nurse left reluctantly. Saskia waited until the door closed, then spoke in a voice I hadn't heard since she was 16, and caught me in a lie about her mother's cancer prognosis. "Something's wrong. I can see it on your face. Tell me what's happening." "I'm looking into it," I said. "But I need you to trust me and rest, just for a few more days. Can you do that?" She studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. But I saw the lie in her eyes matching my own. She wouldn't wait. She'd demand answers the moment she had strength to enforce the demand. I left her room with a lie sitting heavy between us. She thought I was protecting her privacy with the hospital staff. I was protecting her from the truth until I could put my grandson back in her arms. That meant I had maybe 48 hours before Saskia grew strong enough to demand answers. I couldn't deflect 48 hours to find a 3-week-old baby, hidden by the two people who had every reason to make sure he stayed, disappeared. The HR database opened at 5:47 a.m., 2 hours before anyone else would arrive at Meridian Freight Group, and I typed my CFO's name into the search field, like I was investigating a stranger, instead of someone I had personally approved for hire 4 months ago. 48 hours. That's what I'd given myself before Saskia would be strong enough to demand answers I couldn't deflect. I'd spent the night making lists, mapping timelines, trying to connect evidence into patterns that would lead me to a 3-week-old baby hidden somewhere in Charlotte. The place to start was understanding exactly how deep Stellan and Daria's connection ran. Daria Finch's personnel file loaded on screen. Education, North Carolina State. Bachelor's in molecular biology. Then MBA from Duke, completed last year. Employment history. Genesis Testing Lab, Senior Laboratory Technician. 2017-2023. 6 years handling DNA analysis, genetic testing, clinical specimens, then a sudden pivot to executive leadership. I opened the hiring notes, the internal memos documenting her interview process. The board had raised concerns. No executive experience. No operations background. Straight from lab bench to C-suite, made several directors uncomfortable. But Stellan had overridden every objection. His written recommendation was still in the file. Daria brings fresh perspective and technical precision we need at executive level. Her analytical rigor will transform our financial forecasting. I had read those words 4 months ago and thought they sounded reasonable. Now I read them as a man installing his accomplice in a position of power and access. I had built a company worth $40 million and somehow missed that my son-in-law was building a conspiracy inside it. The timestamp on her hire date, May 15, 2023. I pulled up my calendar from that month. Saskia's pregnancy announcement at family dinner, May 12, 2023. 3 days. He'd hired Daria 3 days after learning he was going to be a father. I printed every page of her file, every memo, every recommendation Stellan had written. Then I locked my office and drove to the one person who had helped my family navigate legal complexity for 3 decades. Ulysses Riddle's law office occupied the 3rd floor of a brick building near the courthouse. The kind of traditional practice that still used leather-bound books and brass nameplates. Ulysses Riddle, 63, had served as Townsend family attorney for 3 decades from his oak-paneled office, handling everything from my father's estate to the trust fund I had established for my grandson 3 weeks before his disappearance. He stood when I entered, concern immediately crossing his face. "Harlan, it's been too long. What brings you here?" "I need help with something that can't go through normal channels." "Family matter." Ulysses closed his office door and gestured to the chairs across from his desk. Tell me everything. From the beginning, leave nothing out. So I did. Hospital bracelet to birth certificate to fake DNA to Genesis lab to Daria's employment history. I laid out printed documents on his desk like evidence at trial, which, I realized, they might eventually become. Ulysses took notes in precise longhand, asked questions about dates and witnesses, made me repeat certain details to ensure accuracy. This was why I'd come to him instead of going straight to police. He understood that evidence needed structure, that accusations against family required ironclad proof. Stellan called you outdated. The man had been planning this for months. The DNA test is the weak point, Ulysses said finally. If it's fabricated, that's fraud. If it's real, it changes the entire case. Daria worked at that lab for 6 years. She knows how to produce whatever results she wants. Proving that requires more than suspicion. You'll need someone who can follow money and people without being noticed. I know an investigator, Conrad Barton. Former police detective, now private. He's worked several corporate fraud cases for me. I nodded. What else? We document everything. No confrontations until we have enough proof to guarantee recovery. If they know we're investigating, they could move the baby beyond our reach. Agreed. Ulysses leaned back in his chair, studying me over his glasses. There's something else you should know. 6 months ago, Stellan suggested to Saskia that I was too old-fashioned for modern estate planning. He wanted her to use a younger firm, someone more familiar with contemporary financial instruments. She refused. Said you trusted me, so she trusted me. The timeline clicked into place. 6 months ago was March, before Saskia's pregnancy. Stellan had been laying groundwork long before the baby existed. Now I understand why he wanted me gone. Ulysses continued. The trust fund for Saskia's children, I drafted it. I know exactly what assets are designated, what triggers access, what happens if paternity is questioned. He needed you isolated from anyone who could spot irregularities in his story. How many other trusted people had he tried to remove from our lives? Who else did he target? I asked. I don't know. But patterns like this rarely stop at one attempt. You should review who Saskia has stopped seeing, which friendships have faded, which advisors have been replaced. Isolation is a process, not an event. Ulysses pulled a business card from his desk drawer and slid it across to me. Conrad Barton, licensed private investigator. A Charlotte phone number and an address in the same building. He's upstairs on the 5th floor, Ulysses said. I'll call ahead, let him know you're coming. Bring all the documents you showed me. Con will know what to do with them. I stood to leave, but Ulysses stopped me with a hand on my arm. Harlan, I've known your family since your father started Meridian with 1 truck and a prayer. I watched Saskia grow up. If her husband stole her child, we'll get her back. But we do this methodically. We do this right. Ulysses opened his desk drawer and pulled out a business card for Conrad Barton, licensed investigator. The law office that had drafted my father's will and my daughter's trust was about to become command center for finding a stolen infant. We had evidence of fake DNA, suspicious hiring, and attempted isolation. What we needed next was proof of where Stellan and Daria had hidden a 3-week-old baby. The Genesis testing lab occupied a weathered brick building in an industrial park off Wilkinson Boulevard, its faded blue signage competing with a check-cashing storefront and a shuttered auto parts warehouse. Ulysses and I made the drive together the morning after our first meeting. He'd insisted on handling the initial inquiry himself. That conducting preliminary due diligence sounded less threatening than grieving grandfather demanding answers. But I wasn't about to wait in his office while he visited the facility where my son-in-law's conspiracy had likely been manufactured. We parked beside a rusted dumpster. The contrast to Novant Presbyterian's pristine medical tower was immediate and damning. Legitimate DNA testing companies didn't operate from buildings with cracked parking lots and peeling window frames. "Wait here," Ulysses said, pulling a legal pad from his briefcase. "Let me establish their baseline responses before they know family is involved." I watched him approach the glass entrance door, where a sun-bleached accreditation certificate hung at eye level, its frame warped by what looked like old water damage. The date read 2019. 4 years without updating their credentials display. Through the glass, I could see a small reception area. Ulysses disappeared inside. I stayed in the car, documenting everything with my phone camera, the building exterior, the faded signage, the industrial wasteland surroundings. If this went to court, location photos would help establish the lab's questionable legitimacy. 20 minutes passed. I watched a woman at the reception desk, mid-40s, professional but nervous body language, talking with Ulysses. She kept glancing toward an interior door, like she was waiting for backup or permission. 40 years of depositions had taught me to read evasion from across a parking lot. Another man appeared, older, wearing a white coat that looked more costume than professional attire. They spoke for several minutes. The woman made a phone call. The man in the white coat shook his head repeatedly. Whatever Ulysses was asking, he wasn't getting cooperation. Finally, Ulysses emerged and walked back to the car with measured steps. His expression was carefully neutral, the face of a lawyer who'd just confirmed his worst suspicions. "Well?" I asked as he climbed in. "Vanessa Cho, reception supervisor. Confirmed Daria Finch worked there from 2017 to 2023. Senior lab technician. Handled DNA analysis and genetic testing. Left in good standing to pursue executive opportunities. Did she verify the DNA test? Refused. Said she'd need a court warrant to discuss specific test results or client information. But her refusal was interesting. She didn't say she couldn't verify it. She said wouldn't. I processed the distinction. She knows it exists, or she's been told to stonewall inquiries about it. When I showed her a copy of Stellan's test, she became visibly nervous. Called for Dr. Felix Granger, the technical director, the man in the white coat. He gave me the official line. Client confidentiality, HIPAA regulations, need proper legal authorization, standard corporate deflection. But then he made a mistake. Ulysses flipped open his legal pad, reading from notes. I asked about their accreditation status. He said, Genesis maintains all necessary certifications. I pointed out the 2019 certificate in their lobby. He said we had some administrative issues in 2022, but they've been resolved. Administrative issues. That's what he called CLIA violations. CLIA violations. The acronym was familiar from hospital conversations. Clinical Laboratory Standards. Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendments. Federal regulations governing all labs that test human specimens. Violations can result in license suspension, fines, shutdown. I'll need to pull their compliance records, but if they had violations in 2022, and Stellan's DNA test is dated 2023, I finished. They might have been operating under restricted license or suspension when they supposedly ran his test. The lights had flickered during the conversation. I'd watched through the window, seen the fluorescent tubes stutter like the building's electrical system was as compromised as its certifications. There's more, Ulysses said. When I asked if they kept visitor logs for clients who came in personally, rather than sending samples through physicians, Vanessa let something slip, she said. We don't discuss client visits. But then immediately caught herself and added, not without authorization. I pressed gently. Mentioned that my client was trying to verify his son-in-law's account of events. She went very still and said, Mr. Lockwood's visits are documented like any other client. Visits. Plural. Exactly. I asked how many times he'd been there. She realized her mistake and shut down completely, referred me back to Dr. Granger, who said he couldn't comment on whether specific individuals had or hadn't visited the facility. I stared at the building, imagining Stellan walking through that glass door multiple times, in August. Weeks before he claimed his daughter died, coordinating, planning, making sure Daria's former employer would produce exactly the results he needed. "How long before we can get a warrant?" I asked. "Depends on what Conrad finds. If we can establish probable cause for fraud, a judge might authorize record seizure. But we need more than suspicion. We need—" Ulysses's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and showed it to me. Unknown number. Text message: "Stop asking questions about Genesis or Daria. This is your only warning." We both looked back at the lab's entrance. Vanessa Cho stood visible through the glass door, her phone in her hand, watching our car. Ulysses photographed the building's exterior, the faded signage, made notes about the CLIA violation mention. His phone buzzed again, the same unknown number. He ignored it and started the engine. "Someone made a call the moment I left the building," he said quietly. "Which means we're not just investigating a conspiracy. We're actively being monitored by people willing to issue threats." I looked at the threatening text on his phone screen. The investigation had just triggered a response, which meant we were getting close to something Stellan couldn't afford to have exposed. Conrad Barton's office smelled like coffee and printer toner, its walls lined with filing cabinets that suggested decades of other people's secrets. The threatening text Ulysses had received outside Genesis Lab sat between us like evidence, screenshot, printed, and added to the growing file. 24 hours had passed since that warning. No follow-up, no escalation. Just silence that felt more calculated than the threat itself. "Someone's monitoring your investigation," Conrad said, studying the text message. "But they're not trying to stop you. They're trying to gauge how much you know." Conrad Barton was a compact man in his late 50s, with reading glasses on a chain, and the methodical demeanor of someone who'd spent 30 years extracting truth from paper trails. Ulysses had called him immediately after the Genesis Lab visit, and Conrad had spent the past day following money. Now he slid a folder across his desk. "Cascadia Solutions, LLC," he said, "registered in Delaware. Sole owner, Daria Finch. Open July 2023. Single transaction $840,000 from your son-in-law's personal account on September 28th. I opened the folder. Bank records, incorporation documents, transaction logs. Everything official and damning. 4 days after he told Saskia the baby died, I said. He was moving money while my daughter was sedated in a hospital bed. $840,000. Nearly everything Stellan had outside the trust. His entire liquid assets. The implications settled into place. He's betting everything on this scheme succeeding. More than that. Look at the company structure. Conrad pointed to the incorporation papers. Delaware LLC with privacy provisions. Daria's listed as sole owner, but the operating agreement allows for silent partners. He's funneling money to her while keeping his name off the paperwork. Planning for divorce, I said. Move assets before filing so they don't get split in settlement. Exactly. But here's what's interesting. The account's still active. They haven't touched that money. It's sitting there, waiting. Waiting for what? Conrad leaned back in his chair. That's what you need to find out. But whatever they're planning, it requires nearly $1 million. And timing they haven't executed yet. I stared at the transaction date. September 28th. The conspiracy had a paper trail now. Financial proof connecting Stellan to Daria through a shell company opened the same month she was hired. Funded days after my grandson disappeared. Can you trace where the baby might be? I asked. If they're spending this kind of money, there has to be... I'm working on it. But I need more than bank records. I need communication, emails, texts, anything that shows coordination. I can get you emails, I said. I own the company. I have access to their corporate accounts. 2 hours later, I sat in Trevor Ashford's IT department at Meridian headquarters. Trevor, our IT manager for 12 years, had the cautious professionalism of someone who understood that email audits meant someone's career was about to end. "Mr. Townsend," he said carefully, "this is unusual. You want archived exchanges between the CEO and CFO. Complete record, August through present. Everything sent or received between Stellan Lockwood and Daria Finch on company systems." My hands were steady on the steering wheel between Conrad's office and Meridian Tower, but my mind kept circling the same thought. They'd planned this before my grandson was born. Trevor typed commands into his terminal. These were sent from Mr. Lockwood's executive account to Ms. Finch's CFO account, August 14th. He paused, reading from screen. "Once the divorce timing is appropriate and everything stabilizes, we can move forward with the arrangement we agreed on." August 14th, I repeated. 3 weeks before my grandson was born. Trevor scrolled through more messages, his expression growing more uncomfortable with each one. "They're not subtle. September 1st, D. The plan requires patience. Trust the timeline. We'll have everything we wanted." Signed with just the letter S. I watched him compile emails into a folder. Dozens of messages. Months of coordination. Evidence of an affair was clear enough. The intimate tone, the private arrangements, the careful avoidance of names. But it was more than just an affair. This was strategic planning. September 10th, Trevor said. "Lab results confirmed. We can proceed with phase 2. You were right about the timing." Then Daria's response. "Told you 6 years of experience would pay off. When do we tell her?" Lab results. 6 years of experience, Genesis testing lab. The DNA fraud wasn't just a convenient lie, it was a calculated move they'd discussed in advance. How long had they rehearsed their performances, Stellan's grief? Daria's professional competence, the coordinated lie. "Print everything," I said. "Every message between them from July forward." Trevor hit the print command. "Mr. Townsend, I have to ask, is this related to Saskia's hospitalization? Because if there's something happening that affects her safety..." "It is. And everything you're printing stays confidential until I say otherwise. Understood?" "Yes, sir." The printer hummed for several minutes. Trevor collected pages and slid them across the desk. 8 pages of evidence that Stellan and Daria had orchestrated everything. The hiring, the affair, the plan to claim the baby died, the divorce timeline. I scanned through messages chronologically, watching the conspiracy unfold in corporate email format. Then I reached the final message. Dated September 20th, 4 days before Saskia collapsed. D. Everything's arranged. Baby transferred to safe location. Confirm the Florida arrangement is secure before we proceed. Once S is recovered from the trauma, we move forward with divorce filing. 6 months and we're free. S. Florida arrangement. Safe location. 6 months. Trevor was watching my face. "Is there a problem?" "No," I said, folding the pages into my briefcase. "Thank you, Trevor. This helps more than you know." I left Meridian Tower with 8 pages of email proving Stellan and Daria had planned everything the affair. The fake death, the divorce timing. But the final message haunted me all the way to my car. They hadn't just stolen a baby. They'd already moved him somewhere outside North Carolina jurisdiction. The realization hit me during the silent drive back from Meridian Tower. I'd installed security cameras throughout the warehouse complex 15 years ago and never disabled them. The email's final line kept repeating in my mind. Baby transferred to safe location. Confirm the Florida arrangement is secure before we proceed. Transferred. That word implied movement. Logistics, a physical handoff. And if Stellan had needed to move an infant without being seen, where better than a warehouse complex he had executive access to? At an hour when no one would question the CEO working late, I called Conrad from the car. "Meet me at the Meridian warehouse in 30 minutes. I think I know how they moved him." The warehouse complex sat dark and silent when we arrived. I unlocked the security office with my chairman credentials and booted up the surveillance system. I installed these cameras in 2008 after a cargo theft, I explained, navigating through folder structures. 30-day rolling archive, motion activated. If Stellan used company property that night, we'll have it. September 24th, Conrad said, pulling out his notebook. That's the night your daughter collapsed at home, correct? 2:17 a.m. I got the call from the neighbor at 2:19. Pull up everything from midnight to 4. The system loaded slowly. Gigabytes of footage from 6 weeks ago. I narrowed the search to Southgate, the entrance closest to the loading docks. The one with the weakest overnight security protocols. 2:03 a.m. 14 minutes before my daughter's neighbor found her unconscious. Conrad leaned forward. There, vehicle entering frame. Stellan's Mercedes. License plate clearly visible under sodium lights. The timestamp burned in the corner, 09/24/2023, 02/03/47. I watched my son-in-law park near loading dock C. He sat in his car for 90 seconds, checking his phone, waiting. Then he got out carrying a large insulated bag, the kind medical suppliers used for temperature-sensitive materials. The kind that could safely transport an infant. Freeze there, Conrad said. That bag, medical cooler size, large enough for an infant in a carrier. Stellan walked into the warehouse through the side entrance. His keycard access logged automatically, another digital trail he hadn't considered. 12 minutes passed. Then he emerged empty-handed. Got in his Mercedes, but didn't leave. He waited. At 2:18 a.m., a second vehicle entered the frame. Daria's sedan, the same one I'd seen her drive to the hospital. She parked beside Stellan's car. Through the grainy footage, I could see them talking through car windows for 6 minutes. Then both vehicles exited together, her following him. Daria arrives 14 minutes later. Conrad noted. They coordinate exit. This was planned down to the minute. He went inside for 12 minutes, I said. Long enough to meet someone, make a handoff. How many times had Stellan rehearsed the timing drugging Saskia? Driving to the warehouse, meeting his accomplice. Conrad rewound the footage, enhanced the image quality, zoomed in on the loading dock area. Wait, there's a third vehicle, background frame. I hadn't seen it on first viewing, parked in shadow at the far end of loading dock C. A white panel van. No company markings. Positioned where interior cameras had limited coverage. When does it arrive? I asked. Let me scroll back. Conrad jumped to 1:45 a.m. The van pulled in, parked, sat dark and silent. At 2:03, Stellan arrived. At 2:15, Stellan exited the warehouse, empty-handed. At 2:31, the white van left. Conrad froze the frame on the van's departure. Enhanced the image. Partial license plate visible FKR 72, then digital blur. Florida plate, I said. The email mentioned Florida arrangement. They had someone waiting here to transport him. Conrad pulled out his phone. Calls to contacts I didn't recognize. Third call connected. Hey, it's Conrad Barton. I need a plate run. Partial Florida registration. FKR 72, last digit unclear. White panel van. Commercial size. Yeah, I'll hold. We waited in silence. The footage stayed paused on that white van pulling away from loading dock C at 2:31 a.m. The timestamp haunted me. Van exits at 2:31, Conrad said quietly. Your daughter's neighbor called you at 2:19. While you were rushing to Saskia's house, your grandson was already on his way out of state. Conrad's voice seemed distant, clinical, but his hand on my shoulder was steady. Got it, Conrad said into his phone. Sunshine State Rentals, Jacksonville, registration FKR 729. Yeah, thanks. He hung up and immediately dialed another number. Sunshine State Rentals, he explained while it rang. I've got a contact there who owes me. If we can get the rental agreement, we'll have a name. Whoever drove that van has your grandson. The third ring connected. Conrad put the phone on speaker. Barton Investigations, Conrad said. I need rental records for vehicle registration FKR 729. White panel van. Date range September 23rd through 25th. The voice on the other end was professional, cautious. Mr. Barton, that's going to require proper authorization. We can't just... This is a kidnapping investigation. Infant victim. I'm working with family attorney and preparing warrant request. Your cooperation now means favorable documentation later. Silence. Then keyboard sounds. Van rented September 22nd. Returned September 25th. Renter Cascadia Solutions, LLC. Corporate account. Mailing address in Delaware. Conrad and I locked eyes. Cascadia Solutions. Daria's shell company. The same account that had received Stellan's money. Who signed for the vehicle? Conrad asked. Authorized representative Daria Finch. Driver's license on file. North Carolina issue. Conrad paused the footage on the clearest frame of the Florida van pulling away from loading dock C. The partial plate just barely legible under the sodium lights. He pulled out his phone and dialed a contact in Jacksonville. Sunshine State Rentals keeps records for 7 years, he said while it rang. If we can get the full plate number and rental agreement, we'll have a name. Whoever drove that van has your grandson. The answer came on the third ring. I parked across the street from the Myers Park residence I'd bought for Saskia's wedding 4 years ago, rehearsing the performance I was about to give. Conrad's Florida contact had confirmed everything the night before, van rented by Daria's shell company, driven out of state. While I'd been rushing to my daughter's unconscious body, but knowing the conspiracy existed and proving it in ways that would force Stellan to reveal the baby's location were different problems. I needed him to slip, to confirm what I already knew, in a way I could use. So I was here, playing concerned grandfather, when what I really wanted was to drag him to the warehouse and show him the security footage until he broke. I rang the doorbell at noon. Stellan answered, and I watched surprise flicker across his face before the corporate mask returned. Harlan. This is unexpected. I was sorting through medical bills from the hospital stay, I said, holding up a folder I'd brought as prop. Thought I'd stop by. Make sure Saskia's recovering well. He hesitated just long enough to signal he didn't want me there, then stepped aside. That's of course. She's resting. Doctor prescribed sleep aids to help with the grief. I walked into the living room and stopped. Saskia lay on the couch in yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt, eyes half open, a throw blanket pulled to her chest. She looked at me with delayed recognition, like her brain was processing through fog. Dad? Her voice was slurred. What are you doing here? 3 weeks later, she still needs sedatives, I said, keeping my tone light, conversational. That seems excessive. The doctors think it's best, Stellan said quickly. She's not sleeping well. Nightmares about the baby. I walked to Saskia's side, bent down, kissed her forehead. Her pupils were dilated. Her skin had that papery quality that came from too little sunlight and too much pharmaceutical assistance. On the side table, 3 prescription bottles. Names I didn't recognize, but doses that looked substantial. Every word I spoke was calibrated, every gesture measured. This was a deposition disguised as family concern. How are you feeling, sweetheart? I asked. Tired, she mumbled. Always so tired. Why don't you rest? I said gently. I need to talk to Stellan about some paperwork anyway. She closed her eyes without arguing. Stellan led me to the kitchen, and I watched him calculate how to manage this unexpected visit. Insurance company's been asking questions, I said, opening the folder. Strange thing they can't find a death certificate filing. No discharge record for the baby either. Stellan's hands went into his pockets. Hospitals make mistakes. You know how chaotic that night was. I'm sure the paperwork will surface eventually. I've been in business 50 years. Paperwork doesn't just disappear unless someone never filed it in the first place. His shoulders stiffened. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. Just trying to understand why the hospital has no record of an infant death when you told me your daughter died. The hospital's incompetent. They lost records during the emergency. I've been dealing with their bureaucracy for weeks. He turned to the coffee maker, poured himself a cup with hands that weren't quite steady. Is there anything else? Actually, yes. Estate attorney suggested we might want an independent DNA test for the trust documentation. Stellan froze mid-pour. Coffee splashed over the rim of his cup onto the counter. That's completely unnecessary. The lab took care of everything. He caught himself. The words hung in the air between us. His eyes widened fractionally as he realized what he'd said. The lab took care of everything. 4 words. Full confession. The hospital lab, I mean, he continued quickly. They did the testing when she was born. You don't need to put Saskia through that again. She's barely holding together as it is. I let silence stretch, watching him construct his recovery story in real time. You're probably right, I said finally, closing my folder. I don't want to reopen wounds. I'll tell Ulysses to drop it. Relief flooded his face. Good, that's good. Saskia doesn't need more trauma. How long will she need the sedatives? I asked, glancing toward the living room where my daughter lay drugged on the couch. As long as it takes. Doctor's orders. Which doctor? Another pause. Her psychiatrist, Dr. Morrison. She's been seeing him twice a week. A psychiatrist I'd never heard of. Prescribing medications that kept my daughter barely conscious 3 weeks after she'd been drugged unconscious the first time. Did he really think I'd missed it? Or was he desperate enough to believe his own cover story? I should let you get back to her, I said, standing. Thank you for the time, Stellan. I know this has been hard on both of you. He walked me to the door, visibly relaxing now that I was leaving. We're managing, day by day. I paused on the front step. One more thing. When do you think Saskia will be strong enough to go back to work? The board's been asking. Not for a while. Months, probably. She needs rest. Complete rest. Of course, take all the time you need. I drove 3 blocks before pulling over, hands shaking on the steering wheel. The lab took care of everything. Stellan had just confirmed Genesis Lab's involvement in front of a witness myself. But more chilling was what I'd seen through the living room archway as I left Saskia, barely conscious on the couch. Prescription bottles lined up on the side table like sentries. Stellan wasn't just hiding a kidnapping. He was still drugging her, keeping her compliant while he consolidated control of everything she'd inherit. The emergency board meeting notice went out at 7 a.m. with one line of justification. Compliance audit regarding recent executive decisions, attendance mandatory. 2 days had passed since Stellan's verbal slip about the lab. 2 days watching him believe he'd successfully covered his mistake, while I assembled evidence that would force him into a corner. He'd kept Saskia drugged and compliant. I would keep him thinking he was safe until the moment wasn't. The boardroom filled at 9 a.m. sharp. Eleanor Hastings, longest-serving board member at 14 years, arrived first with the institutional memory and audit experience to recognize when executive explanations didn't add up. Marshall Crowe, former banking executive turned board member, specialized in financial oversight and had zero tolerance for undocumented large transactions. 3 other directors filed in, all looking confused by the urgent summons. Stellan and Daria arrived separately. He came through the main entrance with coffee and his usual corporate confidence. She arrived 5 minutes later via the back elevator. Face pale, shoulders tight. They didn't acknowledge each other. I stood at the head of the table. Appreciate everyone's prompt attendance, I said. We're here to review compliance concerns flagged during recent internal audit. Stellan, Let's start with executive hiring. Walk us through the CFO selection process last July. Stellan set down his coffee with practiced calm. Standard executive search. Daria's credentials were exceptional. I presented them the board in the July meeting you all approved. The July meeting was procedural vote, Eleanor said, flipping through notes she'd brought. We didn't review her complete employment history. That's unusual for C-suite appointments. Something flickered in Stellan's expression. Almost imperceptibly, the first crack in his performance. Daria came highly recommended, Stellan said. 6 years of technical experience, fresh MBA, exactly the analytical perspective we needed for financial modernization. 6 years at Genesis Testing Lab, I added, watching his reaction. Correct. Daria's eyes flicked to me, then away. That's correct. I was senior lab technician before pursuing my MBA. And you hired her 4 months ago. Eleanor continued, reading from her notes. May 15th, 3 days after Saskia announced her pregnancy at the family dinner I attended. The room went quiet. Board members who'd assumed this was routine paperwork review were now paying attention. I don't see how the timing of my daughter's pregnancy is relevant to CFO hiring, Stellan said carefully. Neither do I said. Just noting the timeline. Let's move to financial oversight. Daria, as CFO. You countersign all executive account transactions above certain thresholds. Correct? Yes. Standard dual authorization protocol for amounts exceeding $50,000. Internal audit flagged personal account transfer exceeding $800,000 in September. Can you explain why such a transfer required your counter-signature? Daria went pale. Her hand moved to her water glass, fingers trembling. Daria's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. That would be confidential employee banking. I'd need to review specific transaction details before commenting publicly. If it involved company accounts or executive authority, it's board business. Marshall Crowe said, his banking background making him zero in on the evasion. We'll need those records by end of day. Stellan leaned forward. With respect, Marshall, personal banking doesn't require board disclosure. If an executive moved personal funds between personal accounts, that's not company business. Then why did it require CFO countersignature? I asked. Personal transfers don't go through company authorization protocols unless they intersect with company resources somehow. Silence. Daria stared at the table. Stellan stared at me. I'll need to review the audit findings, Daria said finally. I process dozens of authorizations monthly. Without seeing the specific transaction, I can't comment on details. We can arrange that review, I said. Eleanor, can you work with Daria this afternoon to pull the documentation? Eleanor nodded, making notes. Stellan changed tactics. With respect, Harlan, you've been chairman emeritus for 2 years. This level of operational scrutiny seems personal, not procedural. It's procedural, I said evenly. When internal audit flags concerns, board reviews them. That's governance. Unless you're suggesting we should ignore audit findings. I'm suggesting, Stellan said, voice hardening. That sudden interest in routine transactions might be motivated by family issues rather than corporate oversight. Daria spoke suddenly, cutting through the tension. I want to clarify I executed transactions the CEO authorized. Any questions about appropriateness should be directed to executive decision-making, not financial processing. Every board member turned to look at her. She'd just publicly separated herself from Stellan's authority, thrown him under scrutiny while positioning herself as following orders. Stellan's face went rigid. Then we're agreed, I said. Stellan, you'll provide full documentation of all personal and professional decisions made since July. Board will reconvene Friday to review findings. How long before one of them broke completely and tried to negotiate immunity by betraying the other? This is harassment, Stellan said. You're using board authority to investigate your son-in-law because you don't like how I'm handling Saskia's recovery. I'm using board authority, I said quietly, to review compliance concerns. If there's nothing inappropriate in your decisions, documentation will confirm that. Meeting adjourned. Board members filed out slowly, exchanging glances that said they knew this wasn't routine audit review. Carol and Marshall lingered, clearly wanting to ask questions I couldn't answer yet. I watched Stellan and Daria through the glass wall. They stood 15 feet apart in the hallway, not speaking, not looking at each other, the body language of accomplices who just realized their partner might become their liability. Stellan pulled out his phone and walked toward the elevator. Daria waited exactly 30 seconds, then headed the opposite direction toward the stairs. They weren't coordinating anymore. They were preparing separate defenses. The confrontation happened in my study at noon. Door locked, phones off. I'd spent the morning after the board meeting preparing for this moment. Ulysses had finished his research on Genesis Testing Lab overnight, and what he'd found turned questionable evidence into prosecutable fraud. Now Stellan sat across from me in the leather chair he'd occupied dozens of times over the years, still wearing his board meeting composure like armor, while Ulysses stood by the window with a folder thick enough to end careers. Outside, Meridian's logistics yard hummed with midday activity freight trucks positioning for afternoon departures, warehouse crews running inventory checks, normal operations continuing while I prepared to dismantle my son-in-law's entire conspiracy. "We need to talk about the DNA test," I said. Stellan's expression didn't change. "I already showed you the results, September 10th, conclusive." "You did." I leaned back in my chair, watching his face for tells. Genesis Testing Lab, Charlotte location, very official-looking document. "It is official. Certified laboratory, proper chain of custody, legally admissible results." He gestured toward his briefcase with practiced confidence. "I have the original if you'd like to examine it again." "Please." He produced the document with the confidence of a man holding an unbeatable hand, laminated, embossed with the lab's seal. Signed by a medical director whose credentials were printed in small text at the bottom. I studied it while he watched, that small smile playing at the corner of his mouth like he was indulging an old man's paranoia. The test was dated September 10, 2023. Sample collection, processing, analysis, results, all documented in clinical detail spanning 3 pages. According to this piece of paper, Stellan had no biological relationship to the child Saskia had delivered. The science looked impeccable. The formatting was perfect. The certification appeared legitimate. "Satisfied?" he asked. "Actually, yes. This tells me everything I needed to know." I slid the document across the desk to Ulysses. "Care to explain what you found?" Ulysses picked up the laminated test, held it to the light like he was examining counterfeit currency. "Genesis Testing Lab, Charlotte location, 4400 Park Road." He opened his folder. "Opened in 2019. CLIA certified for paternity testing, toxicology, basic diagnostics. Processed approximately 2,000 tests annually." "Exactly," Stellan said. "Certified laboratory. Everything legal and above board." "Was certified," Ulysses corrected quietly. Past tense. He pulled out a document, set it on my desk facing Stellan. "Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services Compliance Report. Genesis Testing Lab's CLIA certificate was suspended June 30th, 2023 for repeated violations. Final revocation occurred July 15th. The room went very quiet. I could hear the wall clock ticking, the distant sound of a forklift beeping in the yard below. I picked up the CMS report, scanned the official letterhead. The violation details laid out in bureaucratic precision. Certificate number, dates of inspection, findings. The language was dry but damning: improper sample handling, inadequate quality control, failure to maintain required documentation standards, operating with expired reagents. Effective July 15, 2023. Genesis Testing Lab was prohibited from performing any clinical testing. Your DNA test, I said to Stellan, watching the color drain from his face, is dated September 10th, 2023. His composure slipped, but he said nothing. 2 months. Ulysses continued, his investigator's voice precise and unemotional. After the lab lost legal authority to process any samples, they couldn't legally conduct paternity tests, couldn't legally analyze DNA, couldn't legally certify results. Any document dated after July 15th is either a fabrication or a fraudulent use of revoked credentials. Before I reveal what that license revocation truly meant, I need to pause here. What comes next changes everything we thought we knew about Stellan's plan. If you've followed this far, if you're as shocked as I was when these pieces fell into place, drop a comment below. Tell me, did you suspect the DNA test was fake? Or did you believe it like I almost did? And if you're ready to see how deep this conspiracy really goes, stay with me. But I have to warn you, what Ulysses uncovered about that lab goes beyond simple fraud. It reveals something far more calculated. Still here, let's continue. I watched Stellan process this. Saw him cycling through responses like a poker player whose bluff had been called. Denial. Deflection. Anger. I could see him testing each one mentally, discarding them as insufficient. The evidence was too clean, too documented, too irrefutable. The document exists, he finally said, his voice tight. Someone at that lab processed the test. Someone at that lab created a fraudulent document. I corrected. Which raises interesting questions. Who did you pay? How much? And what else did they help you fabricate? You're making assumptions. I'm reading dates on official government documents. I tapped the CMS report with one finger. Your test is dated 2 months after this lab lost its license. That's not an assumption. That's documented evidence of fraud. Ulysses added another page to the growing stack between us. I contacted CMS this morning. They confirmed Genesis Testing Lab conducted no legitimate testing after July 15th. The facility's equipment was locked down pending investigation. Any documents dated after that date are either backdated samples or completely fabricated results. Which means, I said, leaning forward and watching Stellan's composure finally crack at the edges, you paid someone to create a fake DNA test. You presented it to me as legal evidence. You used it to justify keeping my grandson away from his mother. His jaw worked silently for a moment. Saskia was unstable. Saskia was being drugged. We have toxicology reports proving that. And now we have proof your DNA test is fraudulent. I stood up slowly, letting the full weight of the moment settle. So here's what happens next. You have until end of business today, 5 p.m., to tell me where my grandson is. Real location, real documentation, real answers. And if I don't, then tomorrow morning, I file a criminal complaint with Charlotte Mecklenburg Police, fraud, forgery, custodial interference, conspiracy to commit kidnapping. I gestured to the documents covering my desk. I have evidence of all of it. Shell companies, fake lab results, financial transfers, witness statements, warehouse footage. Ulysses has spent 2 weeks building this case. It's airtight. Stellan looked at the evidence spread before him, then back at me. For the first time since this nightmare started, I saw actual fear in his eyes. 5 p.m., I repeated. That's your deadline. Tell me where she is, or I destroy everything you've built. 5 p.m. came and went without a word from Stellan. No confession, no location, no capitulation. He'd chosen to let the deadline pass, gambling that I wouldn't follow through with criminal charges or that he could outmaneuver whatever came next. He was wrong on both counts. Conrad's call woke me at 6:30 the next morning, his voice tight with the kind of controlled urgency that meant something significant had broken overnight. Cascadia Solutions LLC account liquidated at 11:47 last night. he said without preamble. $840,000 wired to offshore account. Then Daria Finch's phone went dark. I sat up, fully alert despite the early hour. She's running. Wire transfer to Cayman account at 11:47 p.m. Conrad confirmed. By midnight, her phone location services disabled, credit cards inactive. I drove by her apartment at 5 this morning. Furniture's there, but clothes and personal items gone. She cleared out fast. She's abandoning Stellan. I stood, moving to my study while Conrad talked, taking his money and running before criminal charges land. She knows yesterday's confrontation means prosecution is coming. Smart move for her, disaster for him. Conrad's voice carried a note of grim satisfaction. He's alone now with all the exposure. Fraudulent DNA test, missing baby, drugged daughter. No co-conspirator to back his story. I looked out the study window at the pre-dawn darkness, processing what Daria's flight meant. The conspiracy was fracturing exactly as pressure mounted. She'd taken the money Stellan transferred through his shell company and left him holding every piece of incriminating evidence we'd compiled. $840,000. Gone in a single wire transfer. Can we trace where she went after the wire? I asked. Working on it. Cayman account likely just a pass-through to somewhere with stricter privacy laws, but that's secondary now. Conrad paused. The important thing is she's in the wind, and Stellan just lost his only ally. If we're going to break him completely, now's the time. I thanked Conrad and ended the call. Then phoned Ulysses. We had a 9 a.m. meeting scheduled with the Trust Management Office, and Daria's flight had just made that meeting exponentially more important. 2 hours later, Ulysses and I sat across from Philip Ashworth in the Trust Management Office's conference room. Philip was 61, silver-haired, dressed in the conservative gray suit of someone who'd spent 23 years administering high-value estate instruments with meticulous precision. He'd managed the Townsend Family Trust since I'd established it in 2019, knew every clause and contingency I'd built into the document. The trust was established in 2019 when Saskia married, Philip said, spreading the document across the mahogany table. $12 million in assets designated for her legitimate biological children. Standard structure distributions at age milestones. Educational provisions. Healthcare access. Clause 7.3, I said. Disputed paternity provisions. Philip flipped to the relevant section. Ran his finger down the dense legal text. If lineage is contested within reasonable time frame, trustee may activate mandatory DNA verification. We built that in at your request. You wanted protection against fraudulent inheritance claims. What's the resolution window? Ulysses asked, leaning forward. 30 calendar days from activation. Philip looked up from the document. If verification isn't completed and paternity established within that time frame, assets remain in holding pending court resolution. Prevents indefinite legal limbo while ensuring claimants can't exploit delays. I could smell the leather binding of the old trust document. Feel the weight of decisions I'd made 4 years ago, not knowing how critical they'd become. Outside the conference room window, Charlotte's financial district hummed with morning activity, normal business proceeding, while I prepared to weaponize a legal instrument designed for protection. How quickly could we find a 3-week-old infant hidden somewhere in Florida, with a 30-day deadline hanging over us? I'm formally contesting the alleged death, I said, meeting Philip's eyes, and requesting activation of Clause 7.3. There's no valid death certificate. The DNA test was fabricated using an unlicensed lab, and the infant's location is currently unknown. Philip made notes in precise handwriting. Grounds are substantial. Once I activate the clause, the 30-day window begins immediately. You'll need to produce the child and complete independent DNA verification within that time frame. What happens if we can't locate the child within 30 days? Ulysses asked. Assets remain frozen pending court order, but more significantly, failure to produce documentation supporting the death claim while you've produced evidence of fabricated records. Philip paused, choosing his words carefully. That creates presumption of fraud. Criminal implications extend beyond trust administration. I nodded slowly. Which means Stellan has 30 days to either produce a body and legitimate death certificate or face fraud charges plus trust fund litigation. Either way, the truth comes out before mid-November. Correct. Philip pulled out the formal activation paperwork. I need your signature as trust grantor and primary beneficiary advocate. Activation is irrevocable once the clock starts. It runs to completion. I signed where he indicated, watched him countersign and date the document. October 13, 2023. 30 days until November 12 at 5 p.m. The legal deadline was now ticking whether we found my grandson or not. Philip handed me the signed activation notice, his expression sympathetic but professional. I hope you find the child, Harlan, for Saskia's sake and your own. So do I. I stood, shook his hand. Ulysses and I were halfway to the elevator when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, stopped walking, read the message twice. Conrad, he said quietly, showing me the text. Jacksonville rental van traced to residential address. Possible baby location confirmed, 1247 Sandpiper Lane, Neptune Beach, Florida. Sending surveillance now. After 3 weeks of investigation, dead ends, and fabricated evidence, we finally had a physical address. A location where my grandson might actually be. But we also had a 30-day deadline. And Stellan would know the moment we made any move toward Florida. One wrong step. One premature approach. And whoever had my grandson could disappear the same way Daria had vanished overnight. I looked at Ulysses. We need surveillance confirmation before we move. No mistakes. He nodded, already typing a response to Conrad. Agreed, but we're running out of time. Conrad's surveillance confirmed the Neptune Beach address by Thursday evening residential property. Single occupant visible, lights on in what appeared to be a nursery. We had our location. Now we needed law enforcement to make it official. The Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Headquarters lobby smelled like institutional coffee and floor wax on Friday morning, and I carried 3 years of careful estate planning in a folder that now documented a crime. Ulysses walked beside me, silent and focused, as we approached the front desk and asked for the Crimes Against Children unit. 10 minutes later, we sat across from Detective Desmond Upshaw in a windowless interview room painted the kind of beige that suggested countless difficult conversations had happened within these walls. Upshaw was 43, built lean like a distance runner, with close-cropped gray hair and the methodical demeanor of someone who'd spent 16 years learning that emotional cases required the coldest procedural discipline. He set a digital recorder on the table between us, pressed record, and opened a fresh notebook. Walk me through this from the beginning, he said. You're reporting a kidnapping of your grandson. Alleged death on September 24th. But you believe the infant is alive in Florida. Not alleged death, I corrected. Fabricated death. Hospital has no death record. Birth certificate shows healthy delivery. And DNA test proving non-paternity came from a lab that lost its license 2 months before the test date. I slid the first document across the table. The birth certificate, showing Saskia Lockwood delivered a healthy male infant on September 5, 2023. Then the hospital record showing no death certificate. Then the fraudulent DNA test dated September 10 from Genesis Testing Lab. Upshaw studied each page, made notes in precise handwriting. We have documentary evidence of conspiracy between the father and company's CFO. Ulysses added, passing over the email trail. Warehouse security footage of 2 a.m. transfer to Florida rental van. Shell company financial records showing $840,000 payment. And traced address in Neptune Beach where we believe the child is currently located. Watching Upshaw examine the warehouse footage frame by frame felt like watching a jury deliberate my grandson's existence. He replayed the section showing the covered bassinet being loaded into the van 3 times. Zoomed in on the timestamp. Made notes about the vehicle's license plate. Then he turned to the Genesis testing lab documents, the official-looking DNA test, alongside Ulysses' CMS compliance report, showing the July 15 license revocation. Genesis Lab, Upshaw said, looking up. We shut them down in July for CLIA violations. Any test dated after July 15th is automatically fraudulent. That's documentary proof of fabricated evidence. You knew about Genesis Lab's closure, I asked. He nodded, flipping back through his notes. Financial crimes flagged Stellan Lockwood 6 weeks ago for unusual transaction patterns at Meridian Logistics. We were building a white-collar case, embezzlement, possibly money laundering. But this, he gestured to the evidence spread across the table, this is kidnapping. That takes priority and gives us leverage for immediate warrant. I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight since I'd found Saskia unconscious 3 weeks ago. Official validation. Criminal investigation. The machinery of law enforcement finally engaging with documenting in isolation. You were already investigating Stellan, Ulysses asked. Different angle, same target. Upshaw pulled out his own case file. Showed us financial transaction reports flagging irregular transfers at Meridian. Started in early September when our financial crimes analyst noticed pattern inconsistencies in corporate account activity. Your evidence, he tapped the shell company records, connects directly to what we were tracking. He spent the next 20 minutes going through every document methodically. Birth certificate, hospital records, fake DNA test, email conspiracy evidence, warehouse footage, shell company financials, Florida address from Conrad's rental van trace. He made notes, asked clarification questions, built a chronological timeline on a whiteboard that turned 3 weeks of investigation into prosecutable narrative. Case number 23-K-4871. My grandson was now officially a kidnapping victim. I'm opening formal investigation, Upshaw said, closing his notebook. Kidnapping, conspiracy to commit fraud, falsifying medical records, custodial interference, and administering controlled substances without consent. Case number 23-K-4871. Emergency warrant application goes to Judge Kellerman today for 1247 Sandpiper Lane, Neptune Beach, Florida. What's the timeline for warrant approval and execution, Ulysses asked. Emergency circumstances. Infant victim. Multi-state jurisdiction Judge Kellerman will prioritize. Upshaw checked his watch. 24 to 48 hours for approval, once we have the warrant. Nassau County Sheriff executes simultaneously with our detectives present. We'll coordinate arrest warrant for Stellan Lockwood here in Charlotte, at the same time hit both locations before either party can warn the other. I leaned forward. If he's at that address, if your grandson is at that address, we'll have him by Monday morning. Upshaw said, with the kind of certainty that came from executing hundreds of warrants. Recovery team includes child welfare specialist, pediatric EMT, documentation photographer. We treat it as both evidence recovery and victim rescue. Could we really have him back by Monday? Alive? Safe? DNA verified after 3 weeks of believing he was dead? Upshaw stood, gathering the evidence into his case folder. I need you to understand something critical. From this moment forward, you do not contact Stellan Lockwood. You do not approach the Florida address. You do not discuss this investigation with anyone who might tip him off. Warrant execution depends on complete operational security. We understand, I said. If he's warned, if he has any indication we're moving on that location, he could relocate the child, destroy evidence, or flee jurisdiction. Everything you've built for 3 weeks could collapse in a phone call. He looked at me steadily. Can you sit on this information for 48 hours? Yes. He walked us to the elevator, case folder already thick with our evidence. The lobby noise filtered down the hallway, phones ringing. People talking. Normal police business proceeding around the edges of my grandson's recovery operation. Don't contact Stellan Lockwood. Don't approach the Florida address. Don't do anything that could compromise warrant execution, Upshaw repeated at the elevator. We moved simultaneously Monday morning. Charlotte arrest team on Lockwood, Nassau County on the Neptune Beach location. If he's tipped off, he could move the child or destroy evidence. The elevator doors closed on his serious expression. Ulysses and I rode down in silence. After 3 weeks of controlling the investigation, building evidence piece by piece, following leads through private channels, I'd just handed my grandson's recovery to strangers with badges and protocols, and a 48-hour window where everything could still go catastrophically wrong. The 48 hours crawled past like a prison sentence. I stayed home, avoided Meridian, didn't call Stellan, didn't check Conrad's surveillance feeds, waited for Upshaw's clearance to move. Saskia was stable at home now, still recovering, asking questions I couldn't yet answer about why I seemed so distracted. Upshaw's call came at 9:17 p.m. on Saturday, 2 hours before the planned Monday morning execution. GPS tracker on Daria Finch's vehicle just pinged active, he said without preamble. She never left Charlotte, and we have warrant authorization for immediate entry. I grabbed my keys. Where? South Charlotte suburbs. 1840 Brookwood Circle. Single-family rental. She liquidated the offshore account Thursday but stayed local. Been hiding 12 miles from your house this entire time. His voice carried the tight focus of someone already mobilizing. I'm assembling the team now. Meet at the staging area. Wendover Road and Sharon Amity. 15 minutes. The drive took 12. I parked in a Medical Plaza parking lot 3 blocks from the target address, where Upshaw stood beside an unmarked van surrounded by tactical officers in black gear. The suburban neighborhood looked ordinary ranch houses with neat lawns, porch lights casting yellow pools on driveways. Saturday night quiet. You've been tracking her since the board meeting, I said. Approaching Upshaw. Why didn't you move sooner? Warrant was approved 2 hours ago. We needed legal authority before breaching a residence. He gestured to the SWAT team loading equipment. But now we have both warrant and location. GPS tracker we placed on her sedan Thursday afternoon just went active when she drove back from a grocery run 40 minutes ago. She's inside now. She never left. 3 days of thinking she'd fled internationally, and she'd been 12 miles from my house. Is he there? I asked. My grandson? Thermal imaging shows 2 heat signatures inside one adult height. One much smaller and stationary in what appears to be a back bedroom. Consistent with infant in crib. Upshaw met my eyes. We'll know definitively in about 20 minutes. Sergeant Dawson approached. A stocky man in his early 40s with the calm efficiency of someone who'd executed hundreds of high-risk warrants without losing perspective on what they were really recovering. He carried a tactical shield and wore body armor marked "Police" in white letters across the chest. Warrant service at 1840 Brookwood. Kidnapping recovery. Dawson said into his radio, voice steady and procedural. Lights on inside. 1 occupant vehicle in driveway. No visible exterior movement. All units in position. Upshaw turned to me. You stay in this vehicle until I clear you. If something goes wrong, if she's armed, if there's resistance, you don't need to see it. If he's in there. If my grandson is alive in that house, I need to know the second you confirm it. You will. He pulled on his vest, checked his radio. But I need your word you'll stay here until I give the all clear. I gave it, though every instinct screamed to follow them the 3 blocks to that rental house where my grandson might be sleeping in a makeshift nursery. Unaware his entire existence had been a battlefield for 3 weeks. The SWAT team moved out at 10:03 p.m. I watched their silhouettes disappear down Brookwood Circle, counted my heartbeats in the silence, tasted copper fear at the back of my throat. Through Upshaw's radio on the dashboard, I heard the approach. Primary entry team at front door, secondary covering rear exit, medical standing by. Then Dawson's voice. Police search warrant, open the door. Silence. 4 seconds, 8 seconds. Breaching now. The sound of the battering ram hitting the door carried faintly through the October night, followed by shouted commands I couldn't make out clearly. Then radio silence while they cleared rooms, checked for weapons, secured the scene. Those 4 minutes of radio silence felt like the 3 weeks of grief compressed into pure, crystallized fear. Then Upshaw's voice, slightly breathless. "Infant recovered. Alive. Appears healthy. Suspect in custody. Paramedics clearing the child now." I didn't remember getting out of the vehicle or walking the 3 blocks. I just found myself standing on the sidewalk outside 1840 Brookwood Circle, watching officers escort Daria Finch out the front door in handcuffs. She looked smaller than she had in the boardroom, wearing sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, hair pulled back, no makeup. She saw me and her expression crumpled. "I was protecting him," she said as they guided her past. "Stellan was going to move him to Florida, sell him to some couple through a private adoption scheme. I took him to keep him safe. You have to believe me." I didn't respond. Didn't trust myself to speak without saying something that would compromise whatever prosecution Upshaw was building. Upshaw appeared in the doorway, gestured me inside. "He's healthy. Paramedics are doing standard checks, but he's been well cared for. Clean. Fed. No signs of distress or neglect." The rental house smelled like baby formula and lavender air freshener. I followed Upshaw down a short hallway to a back bedroom that had been converted into a nursery, portable crib, changing table. Bags of diapers and supplies stacked against the wall. A paramedic in blue gloves gently examined a tiny infant under portable medical lights, checking vitals, looking in eyes and ears, professional and thorough. My grandson, 3 weeks old, alive. The baby's cry, sharp and healthy and furious about being examined, hit me like a physical force. Proof of life after weeks of manufactured death. Heart rate normal. Respiratory normal. No visible injuries or concerning symptoms, the paramedic reported. Based on preliminary assessment, infant appears well-nourished and properly cared for. Recommend full pediatric evaluation within 24 hours. I stood in the doorway, watching the tiny chest rise and fall with each breath, watching small fists wave in protest at the examination. Saskia's features in miniature, her nose, her chin, the shape of his eyes. 3 weeks, I said quietly. You let his mother believe he was dead for 3 weeks while you played house in a rental property with stolen money. Upshaw's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his expression went dark. "What?" I asked. "Stellan Lockwood's not at the Myers Park residence. Arrest team found the house empty, packed bags, cleared safes, recent departure. Security cameras show him loading his Mercedes at 7:40 p.m. tonight." Upshaw looked from his phone to me. He ran. The baby was safe. Daria was in custody. But the architect of the entire scheme had just disappeared into the night with a 2-hour head start. The manhunt for Stellan began immediately. Alerts at airports, borders, financial tracking on his accounts. But with a 2-hour head start and planning that had clearly begun before tonight. Upshaw wasn't optimistic about quick apprehension. I stayed at the rental house while evidence teams processed the scene, unable to leave until I understood the full scope of what had been done to my family. The crime scene team found the safe at 1:15 a.m., boated inside the rental house bedroom closet beneath a false floor panel, commercial-grade fireproof model that required hydraulic tools to extract. False floor panel. Commercial safe bolted to foundation, Upshaw said, kneeling beside the closet where a technician photographed the installation. "This isn't where you stash emergency cash. This is evidence vault construction." I watched them work, smelling the metal tang of tools cutting through bolts, hearing the grind of hydraulic pressure against steel. The safe was the kind banks used for document protection, fireproof, waterproof, designed to survive disasters. "How long has she been in this rental?" I asked. Upshaw checked his phone, scrolled through property records. Lease shows she signed it September 1st, paid 6 months in advance, cash deposit. He looked up from the screen. 3 weeks before the alleged death. She planned this location before the crime even happened. September 1st. She rented the safe house before the baby was even born. The technicians finished extraction at 2 a.m. Wheeled the 300-pound safe into the bedroom on a dolly. A locksmith arrived 15 minutes later, middle-aged woman named Keating, who specialized in forensic safe opening for law enforcement. She studied the model, ran her fingers over the combination dial, made notes about manufacturer specs. S&G 6730 commercial grade, she said. If you want it open without destroying contents, give me 30 minutes. She worked in methodical silence, using specialized listening equipment and manipulation tools that looked like surgical instruments. I sat on the edge of the stripped mattress, tasting stale coffee I'd accepted from a uniformed officer an hour ago, watching Keating's precise movements. The safe opened at 2:30 a.m. with a metallic click that seemed too quiet for the revelations it released. Inside a USB drive in a labeled evidence bag, manila folders arranged in chronological order, a leather document portfolio, and a small fireproof box containing what appeared to be original documents. Upshaw pulled on latex gloves, began removing items one by one while a photographer documented each layer. The USB drive's label read, Complete Archive, 7/15/23, 10/14/23. Complete Text Archive, Upshaw said, plugging the drive into a laptop and scanning the directory structure. Every message they exchanged from July through yesterday, organized by date. Conversation thread. Topic. Financial records. Photos timestamped and geotagged. He scrolled through folders, his expression darkening. This isn't co-conspirator documentation. This is blackmail preparation. She was building a case against him. I moved closer, looking at the laptop screen showing hundreds of organized files. She was building leverage. Upshaw opened a photo file in Stellan holding a sleeping infant. Timestamp showing 2:47 a.m. on September 24. Geolocation tagged to Meridian's warehouse. Everything in here implicates Stellan with documentary proof, while minimizing her own fingerprints. She could hand this to prosecutors and walk with an immunity deal while he takes everything. The betrayal sequence, the affair, the job, all of it had been building for longer than I wanted to admit. The manila folders contained printed financial records, shell company formation documents, with Stellan's signatures. Wire transfer receipts. Emails discussing the Florida arrangement, all carefully organized and annotated. The leather portfolio held the original fake DNA test documents alongside correspondence with Genesis Lab, showing the fabrication process, prices quoted. Delivery timeline. She kept the originals, I said, watching Upshaw page through the Genesis Lab emails. Physical evidence that could put him in prison while she claimed ignorance. More than that. Upshaw reached the bottom of the safe, pulled out a typed document, and started reading. His jaw tightened. October 1st. She wrote this 2 weeks ago. He handed me the manifesto, 3 pages single-spaced, detailing a plan so comprehensive it made the kidnapping look like prologue. I read it standing under the bedroom's harsh overhead light, my hands steady despite what the words revealed. Once sufficient evidence compiled, present SL with choice. Resign CEO position naming me successor, or face criminal prosecution with complete documentation. Board will support transition given scandal alternative. Baby remains leverage until trust transfer complete. 12 million plus CEO compensation achieves original goal full company control. Timeline present ultimatum. By October 15, force resignation by October 30, assume CEO role by November 15. SL departure framed as voluntary amid personal crisis. My role positioned as steady leadership during transition. The conspiracy had layers I hadn't imagined. Stellan betraying Saskia. Daria betraying Stellan. Everyone using everyone. She wasn't his partner, Upshaw said quietly. She was using him to execute the kidnapping, then planning to destroy him and take everything the company, the money, The trust. I set the manifesto down carefully, felt the weight of it settle. The affair, the hiring, the conspiracy, all of it was her long con to seize Meridian. Stellan thought he was running the scheme, but she was 3 steps ahead the entire time. And the baby was just leverage. Upshaw photographed each page of the manifesto. Keep him hidden until she forced the trust transfer. Then what? Return him claiming she'd rescued him from Stellan's plot, position herself as hero while destroying her co-conspirator. The timeline made 6 sense. October 1st manifesto. October 15th planned ultimatum, tonight. She'd intended to present Stellan with this blackmail vault tonight. Force his resignation. Seize control of a logistics company worth $40 million. Instead, we'd found the baby first. And her entire elaborate scheme had collapsed 12 hours before execution. Evidence technicians bagged the USB drive, photographed every document, cataloged the blackmail vault contents with procedural efficiency. Daria Finch hadn't just participated in kidnapping, she'd architected a multi-layered corporate takeover disguised as a family tragedy. But as I watched them seal the final evidence bag, one question cut through the exhaustion. If Daria's plan was this sophisticated, this comprehensive, this ruthless, what had Stellan figured out that made him flee before the arrest teams arrived? He'd known something was wrong before we moved. The house cleared at 7:40 p.m., 2 hours before Upshaw called me about Daria's GPS activation. Someone had warned him. The warning question haunted me until Upshaw called at 8 a.m. with an answer that would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. He warned himself, Upshaw said. Security cameras show Stellan checking police scanner apps starting at 6 p.m. yesterday. When scanner traffic mentioned Brookwood Circle, he panicked and ran. No inside source, just paranoia and public police radio. But he hadn't run far enough. Upshaw's surveillance team located Stellan Lockwood at 10:15 a.m., sitting in the CEO office at Meridian headquarters, as if the previous night's raid had never happened. As if he could still salvage control by showing up to work. I arrived 20 minutes later, watched from the parking lot as Upshaw and 4 officers entered the building. The logistics yard looked. Normal trucks queuing, crews checking manifests, Monday morning operations proceeding. None of them knew their CEO was about to be arrested for kidnapping. Upshaw's voice came through my phone. 3rd floor, corner office. He's reviewing spreadsheets like this is a regular Monday. Does he know you're coming? Building security called up when we entered. He's had 2 minutes to process that police are here. Upshaw's footsteps echoed. Either he thinks he can talk his way out, or he's accepted it's over. I listened to muffled voices, a door opening, then Upshaw's formal tone. Stellan Lockwood, you're under arrest for kidnapping, conspiracy to commit fraud, falsifying medical records, and evidence tampering. Hands behind your back. Stellan's voice, tight with panic. This is absurd. I'm the victim here. Daria Finch manipulated me. Forged documents using my name. I can explain everything. You can explain an interrogation. Right now you're walking out of this building in handcuffs in front of every employee who trusted you as CEO. I ended the call. Walked into Meridian's lobby and positioned myself near the elevator bank. Employees moved around me, carrying coffee and folders, discussing weekend plans, unaware the company's leadership was about to collapse. The elevator chimed. Upshaw emerged first, followed by 2 officers, flanking Stellan in handcuffs, wrists bound behind his back, expression frozen in humiliated fury. Watching Stellan walk out in handcuffs past the boardroom where he'd deflected questions 72 hours earlier felt like watching karma achieve perfect timing. Our eyes met. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but Upshaw kept him moving. Employees stopped mid-conversation, stared, pulled out phones. By tonight, everyone in Charlotte's logistics industry would know. 3 hours later. I sat in the observation room at police headquarters, watching Stellan through one-way glass as Upshaw conducted interrogation. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and stale air conditioning. Stellan had declined a lawyer, apparently believing he could negotiate his way to immunity. Daria planned everything, Stellan said, leaning forward. The fake test, the kidnapping, the offshore accounts. She used her lab connections to forge the DNA results. I believed them. I thought the baby genuinely wasn't mine. Upshaw kept his expression neutral. You personally drove to the warehouse at 2 a.m. with the infant. We have security footage. She told me it was temporary protective custody until paternity was resolved. I didn't know she was hiding him to extort my family. Stellan's voice carried desperate conviction. Everything in her safe proves she manipulated me from the beginning. I'm a victim of her scheme as much as anyone. Every word out of Stellan's mouth was blame deflection. He'd learned nothing. Accepted nothing. The shell company was in your name, Upshaw said quietly. The financial transfers required your signature, the warehouse you chose, the rental van you arranged. Walk me through how Daria forced you to make those specific decisions. Stellan faltered. She had leverage, the affair. Threatened to expose it if I didn't cooperate. I made mistakes, but the core conspiracy was hers. I watched him construct the narrative in real time, testing which lies sounded plausible. He'd spent 3 weeks believing he controlled this situation, and even handcuffed in interrogation. He thought he could manipulate his way to freedom. At 1:30 p.m. Upshaw switched to interrogation room B, where Daria sat across from a different detective. I moved to that observation window, watched her employ the same strategy from a different angle. Stellan orchestrated everything, Daria said. Her CFO composure cracked, but functional. He threatened my job, used the affair as blackmail. The baby was his biological son. He faked the DNA test because he wanted to abandon his family without child support obligations. Upshaw entered, set her manifesto on the table. We found your manifesto, detailing plans to blackmail him and seize the company. Dated October 1st, in your handwriting. Daria didn't flinch. That was defensive documentation. I realized he planned to frame me for everything, so I collected evidence to protect myself. He was always 3 steps ahead until now. The safe was installed September 1st, before the baby was even born. Because I knew what he was planning. The affair started in July. He seduced me specifically because I had Genesis lab connections and financial authority to facilitate his scheme. She met Upshaw's eyes steadily. Every transaction I processed, every document I signed, he coerced through job security threats. I was trying to survive. They'd conspired together, betrayed together, and now they were destroying each other with the same ruthless precision they'd used on my family. Upshaw closed both interrogation files and joined me in the observation area, looking through the glass at Daria still constructing her victim narrative. They're both going to prison, he said. Kidnapping, fraud, conspiracy, minimum 15 years each, probably more when federal charges add on. Neither immunity deal is happening. We don't need their testimony when we have documentary evidence of everything. I nodded, tasting something bitter that might have been satisfaction or exhaustion or both. The conspirators who'd stolen 3 weeks of Saskia's motherhood were done. Finished. Locked in separate cells, blaming each other for their mutual destruction. But as I walked out of the police station into late afternoon sunlight, one task remained. The hardest one. I had to tell my daughter her son was alive. Telling Saskia her son was alive was the hardest conversation of my life. Harder than telling her about the conspiracy. Harder than explaining 3 weeks of manufactured grief. But watching her hold him for the first time in the hospital pediatric ward, watching her count his fingers and toes like she needed physical proof he was real, made every difficult word worth it. 3 weeks later, the legal machinery ground toward resolution. 3 weeks after the arrest, Judge Kellerman signed the emergency divorce decree in chambers with a single question. Mrs. Lockwood, you're certain you want to waive the 90-day waiting period, given these extraordinary circumstances? Saskia sat across from the judge's mahogany desk, wearing a navy suit that looked too big on her frame after weeks of stress and sleepless nights. Judge Kellerman was 62, silver-haired, with the measured demeanor of someone who'd presided over family court for 28 years, and rarely encountered cases where criminal kidnapping eliminated the waiting period entirely. "I'm certain, Your Honor," Saskia said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "My son and I need legal protection from a man who kidnapped his own child and let me believe he was dead for 3 weeks." Kellerman signed the decree with a fountain pen, the scratch of ink on paper sounding final in the quiet chambers. "Criminal conviction on kidnapping charges eliminates parental rights automatically. Mr. Lockwood will have no custody, no visitation, no legal claim to the child. Divorce is granted effective immediately." Ulysses, sitting beside Saskia, added the final request. "We're also requesting name restoration, Saskia Townsend, reverting to maiden name. The child will be legally registered under Townsend's surname as well." "Granted," Kellerman made a notation. "Birth certificate will be amended to reflect correct surname, Mrs. Townsend. You're legally separated from Stellan Lockwood as of today, November 6th, 2023. Watching Saskia sign divorce papers with her maiden name felt like watching her reclaim the identity Stellan had tried to destroy. We left the courthouse through the back entrance to avoid media that still camped at the front steps, hungry for updates on Charlotte's most sensational kidnapping case in a decade. Saskia held the divorce decree in a manila folder, physical proof of legal separation from the man who'd betrayed her in ways most people couldn't imagine. The next day, we met in Ulysses' law office to discuss Meridian's equity situation. Ulysses had the company bylaws spread across his conference table, highlighted sections marking the clause that would strip Stellan of everything he'd conspired to keep. Meridian bylaws, Article 12, equity forfeiture upon felony conviction involving moral turpitude, Ulysses read, tapping the relevant paragraph. Stellan's 18% ownership reverts to company treasury approximately $7.2 million at current $40 million valuation. Saskia studied the numbers, her expression unreadable. She'd been quiet since the arrest, processing betrayal in layers. Some days she was angry, some days numb. Today she looked exhausted. "Can I claim those shares as marital property in the divorce?" she asked. "Forfeiture happens independent of divorce," Ulysses explained. "But board can redistribute treasury shares. With Stellan gone, and your father still chairman, the votes favor transferring his stake to you as settlement. You'd get the equity he tried to keep through conspiracy." I watched Saskia process this, saw her doing the math. 18% of a company her great-grandfather had founded. Shares Stellan had married into, and then tried to protect by faking his son's death. $7.2 million. The equity he'd kidnapped a baby to protect was now going to his victim. "The board meets next week," I said. "Eleanor Hastings and Marshall Crowe both support the transfer. They want you involved in Meridian's leadership fresh start after the scandal." Saskia nodded slowly. "And Stellan gets nothing." "Stellan gets 17 years in federal prison." Ulysses corrected gently. "The equity is the least of what he's losing." The following week, Ulysses called with news that wrapped the final loose ends. I drove to his office with Saskia. Both of us braced for whatever remained of the legal aftermath. "DA called this morning," Ulysses said, gesturing us to seats in his conference room. Both defendants accepted plea deals, and 17 years federal on kidnapping and fraud charges. Daria 15 years federal on conspiracy and fraud. Sentencing is scheduled for December, but the deals are signed. No trial. "No trial," Saskia repeated quietly. "Which means I don't testify." "Correct. You won't have to face either of them in court. Won't have to relive the trauma publicly. Their signed confessions and the documentary evidence were sufficient for the plea agreements." Saskia exhaled, and I heard 3 weeks of tension release in that single breath. She'd been dreading testimony, dreading having to describe finding her nursery locked, waking in the hospital, learning her husband had orchestrated everything. "They're really going to prison," she said. "For that long." Federal time means they serve at least 85%. Ulysses confirmed. Stellan will be 54 when he's released. Daria will be 47. And the restraining orders are permanent. They can never contact you or your son. I leaned forward. And the trust fund is secured. DNA verification completed last week. Your son is biological heir. 12 million protected in trust until he's 25. Everything Stellan tried to steal is now legally protected for his victim. One more thing, Ulysses added, glancing at his notes. The medical board finished its review of Dr. Morrison. His prescribing history for Saskia didn't hold up. No documented diagnosis justifying that dosage. No proper informed consent on file. He surrendered his license rather than fight the complaint. He won't be treating patients again. The legal paperwork felt like building a fortress around Saskia and her son, walls Stellan could never breach again. Ulysses pulled out the final documents, arranged them in chronological order on the table. Divorce decree, equity transfer authorization pending board vote, P agreement confirmations, DNA verification results, trust security documentation. 3 weeks of legal machinery, he said, touching each folder. Everything Stellan and Daria built, the conspiracy, the fraud, the false death. It's all dismantled. You're divorced. The assets are secured. They're convicted. Legally, this is resolved. Saskia gathered the papers carefully, organizing them in her briefcase with the methodical precision she'd inherited from me. Legal protection for her son's future. Documentation of justice served. Proof that the people who'd stolen 3 weeks of her motherhood would spend the next 15 years in prison. But as we stood to leave, I saw the question in her eyes that no legal document could answer. The uncertainty that lingered beneath the relief. How did a mother rebuild trust in the world after the person who should have protected her child was the one who'd stolen him from? The legal war was over. The emotional recovery was just beginning. Legal resolution provided structured divorce decrees, plea agreements, asset transfers. But emotional healing followed no timeline. No procedural steps. No judge's signature to make it official. Saskia started therapy the week after the divorce finalized. Dr. Rachel Sterling's office had the studied neutrality of professional trauma therapy spaces. Soft lighting, no sharp corners, tissues positioned within reach. I'd recommended Dr. Sterling based on Ulysses' referral. She'd spent 18 years helping clients process the kind of psychological damage that courtrooms could punish but never truly repair, specializing in parental grief and complex PTSD. Saskia didn't tell me much about the first session, but what she did share over dinner that evening stayed with me. Dr. Sterling said grief for a living child is disorienting because there's no cultural script, Saskia said, pushing pasta around her plate without eating much. I mourned my son, then had to instantly transition to motherhood without processing the trauma in between. I nodded. Let her talk. Some mornings I wake up and everything feels fine. Then I'll see his face and remember Stellan held him. Drugged me, lied for 3 weeks, and I can't breathe. She set down her fork. Dr. Sterling said recovery isn't linear. Peaceful days and panic days. Sometimes both in the same hour. That's normal trauma processing. What's the goal? I asked quietly. Not eliminating the fear, learning to function alongside it. Saskia smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. She didn't promise recovery would be fast or complete. She promised it would be possible. Dr. Sterling didn't promise recovery would be fast or complete. She promised it would be possible. I saw the nonlinear reality of that recovery play out over the following weeks, some nights. Her footsteps in the hallway at 2 a.m., then 3, then 4, checking the nursery, despite locks and alarms and the fact that the people who'd stolen him were in federal custody. One particular night in mid-November, I found her in the nursery at 11 p.m., reading a novel in the upholstered chair beside the crib while her son slept soundly, his small chest rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. "Good night," I asked from the doorway, keeping my voice low. She looked up, marked her page. 3 nights ago I checked the nursery 11 times between midnight and dawn. Tonight I've been here 20 minutes, just reading while he sleeps. And that feels like progress. "You're safe," Saskia whispered to her sleeping son, so quietly I almost didn't hear. "The people who hurt us are in prison. Your grandfather made sure of that." We're learning how to be safe together. Learning to trust sleep again felt like teaching yourself to breathe underwater, technically possible, profoundly unnatural. 2 days later, I sat in Meridian's boardroom with Eleanor Hastings and Marshall Crowe, discussing governance reforms that would reshape how the company operated. The conspiracy had exposed vulnerabilities I'd been blind to, hiring processes I'd trusted, authority I'd delegated without sufficient oversight, ambition I'd rewarded without questioning motives. "I'm postponing CEO succession indefinitely," I said, setting the transition timeline documents aside. "My daughter and grandson need stability more than this company needs transition planning. Family comes first. I should have remembered that before Stellan's hiring." Eleanor studied me across the mahogany table, her expression thoughtful. "You've been planning succession for 3 years. The board supports your retirement whenever you're ready. I'm not ready. And more importantly, Saskia isn't ready to take on corporate leadership while processing trauma." I pulled out the governance reform proposals Ulysses and I had drafted. "Instead, I'm implementing structural changes to prevent another Stellan." Marshall reviewed the document, eyebrows rising as he read. "Dual approval for all C-suite hires. Mandatory psychological screenings. Independent background verification. Ethics committee with board oversight. These will slow hiring processes significantly." "Good," I said flatly. Stellan moved fast, bypassed scrutiny, and nearly destroyed my family to keep a position he never deserved. If slower hiring prevents another conspiracy, that's a feature, not a bug. Eleanor set down the proposal. "The company is valued at $40 million. These reforms will impact efficiency, potentially growth trajectory. $40 million. I'd have burned every dollar to keep Saskia from experiencing 3 weeks of manufactured grief. Meridian is worth $40 million, I said. But it's worthless if protecting it costs me the people I built it for. My father started this company to provide for his family. I've spent 50 years growing it into a regional logistics leader. But the moment I prioritized business succession over my daughter's safety, I lost sight of why any of this matters." Marshall nodded slowly. "The reforms pass. We'll implement them starting next quarter." "And the CEO search?" Eleanor asked. "Suspended. I'll remain in the role until Saskia and her son are stable, however long that takes." I looked at both of them steadily. This company survived the Great Recession, survived industry consolidation, survived my father's death. It will survive me postponing retirement to prioritize one's family healing. We adjourned the meeting 20 minutes later. Reforms approved, succession timeline shelved. I drove home past the Meridian headquarters sign, illuminated against November twilight. The company my father had started and I'd spent 50 years building into an empire worth $40 million. A month ago, I'd thought protecting that legacy meant strategic succession planning and careful CEO selection. Now I understood. Legacy wasn't about stock valuations or shipping contracts. It was about Saskia, reading peacefully in a nursery chair while her 10-week-old son slept safe from the people who'd tried to steal him. The company would survive leadership changes and governance reforms. The question was whether my family would survive the betrayal that had nearly destroyed them. I pulled into the Myers Park driveway, saw lights on in the nursery window. Imagined Saskia in that chair, learning to trust sleep again while her son breathed steadily beside her. For the first time in weeks, I believed they might. They did survive. Not quickly, not without setbacks, but steadily, week by week, therapy session by therapy session, peaceful night by peaceful night. 2 months after the arrests. I sat at the Myers Park residence kitchen table on a Saturday morning in December, watching Saskia warm a bottle for her 12-week-old son, while sunlight streamed through windows that had once framed unconscious collapse and manufactured tragedy. The kitchen smelled like fresh coffee and baby powder. Saskia stood at the counter testing bottle temperature on her wrist, humming something tuneless while her son made content gurgling noises from his bouncer seat. Morning light caught the steam rising from my coffee mug. Ordinary. Peaceful. Precious. Dr. Hensley wants to see him again Thursday for the 12-week checkup, Saskia said. She said his weight gain is perfect 11 pounds now. 11 pounds. I sipped coffee, tasted the bitter warmth. When I first saw him at the rental house, he was barely 8. He's safe now. We all are. Saskia picked up the baby, settled into the chair across from me. Some days I still can't believe that's true, but most days I can. Dr. Sterling says that ratio improving is what recovery looks like. I watched her feed her son. The routine so normal it felt almost surreal. Pediatrician appointments, weight tracking, weekend plans. Ordinary conversation in the kitchen that had witnessed drugging, investigation, and countless crisis management meetings. Ordinary conversation about pediatrician appointments felt like the most precious luxury normalcy we'd fought 3 months to reclaim. What are you smiling about? Saskia asked. This. You. Him. I gestured at the scene. 3 months ago, I found you unconscious on that floor. Now you're discussing weight percentiles. It's miraculous. I was going to say ordinary, but I'll take miraculous. She finished feeding the baby, set the bottle on the table, and stood to get a burp cloth from the drawer, reaching for it while holding her son. She knocked her coffee mug with her elbow. The ceramic cup hit the tile floor and shattered, coffee splashing across the kitchen. I started to stand, but Saskia was already laughing genuine, surprised laughter that stopped me mid-movement. Well, that's one way to wake up fully, she said, shifting the baby to her shoulder. At least it wasn't the baby bottle. Are you okay? I asked carefully. I'm fine, Dad. It's just a broken cup. She met my eyes, still smiling. 2 months ago, I'd have had a panic attack. Last month, I'd have frozen. Today, I laughed. That's progress, right? That broken cup on the kitchen floor was like a test we hadn't known we were taking, and Saskia had passed. That's significant progress, I said quietly. Getting the broom. Dr. Sterling would be proud. Dr. Sterling would say it's one data point in nonlinear recovery. Saskia laid the baby in his bouncer, grabbed paper towels. But she'd also say celebrating small victories is part of healing. So I'm celebrating the fact that I can drop a coffee cup in this kitchen without reliving the night Stellan drugged me. We cleaned up together, working in comfortable silence while the baby watched with unfocused infant attention. When the floor was clean, and we'd both poured fresh coffee, I brought up the decision I'd made. I'm adding a provision to your son's trust fund, I said. 10%, $1.2 million will fund legal aid for families facing custody fraud or financial conspiracies. Saskia paused mid-sip. Dad, you don't have to. I want to. I met her eyes. I spent 50 years building a company thinking that was legacy. Then I almost lost you both while protecting stock valuations. Real legacy isn't what you accumulate, it's what you protect and who you help. She set down her mug, processing this. If our nightmare can fund lawyers for other families, I continued, then maybe something good comes from it. Maybe a mother gets the investigation resources we had. Maybe a father gets legal counsel, like Ulysses provided. Maybe a child gets brought home before 3 weeks become permanent loss. $1.2 million. The cost of justice for families who couldn't afford what we could. That's a beautiful way to honor what we survived, Saskia said quietly. It's a way to make sure other families survive too. I looked at my grandson, unaware his trust fund would help protect children he'd never meet. Legacy isn't the company or the inheritance. It's being present when your family needs you most, and making sure other families can access that same protection. Saskia came around the table, hugged me from behind. Thank you for everything, for not giving up, for bringing him home, for being exactly who we needed you to be. I covered her hands with mine, both of us looking at the baby who'd been stolen and recovered, mourned and reclaimed. Living proof that justice was possible even when betrayal came from those who should have protected him. The conspiracy had tried to destroy us. Instead, it had taught us what actually mattered. Saskia picked up her son from the bouncer seat, holding him while I carried our mugs to the sink. Ordinary Saturday morning cleanup in the kitchen that had witnessed both our darkest night and our gradual healing. 3 months ago, I'd found my daughter unconscious on this floor. Her son stolen, our family shattered. Now that same kitchen held coffee making and laughter and a 12-week-old baby who would grow up knowing his grandfather had fought to bring him home. I looked at my daughter and grandson in the December morning sunlight and understood with complete clarity we had won. Not because Stellan and Daria were in prison, though they were. Not because the assets were secured, though they were. Not even because justice had been served, though it had. We had won because we were here. Together. Healing in the sunlight of an ordinary Saturday morning. Choosing each other over ambition. Protection over wealth. Presence over legacy. And that victory would last long after the conspiracy faded into memory. And to you listening to my story, remember this: justice and healing are both possible, even when the people who should protect you become the ones you need protection from. Looking back, I see now that I spent 50 years building a company while thinking that was legacy. I almost lost my daughter and grandson while protecting stock valuations. This wasn't supposed to be a revenge story. It was supposed to be a succession plan. Don't make my mistake. The empire you build means nothing if you're not present when your family needs you most. Many people would call this a revenge story, but I see it differently. Yes, I pursued justice and made sure the conspirators faced consequences for what they did. But true revenge would have been about destruction. I chose restoration instead. That choice taught me that the greatest victory isn't in punishing your enemies. It's in choosing your family over everything else. I believe God put me through this trial to show me what actually matters. Not what you accumulate, but who you protect and how you show up when they need you most. If this story moved you, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a comment below. Have you ever had to choose between career and family? What would you have done in my situation? Please share this with someone who might need to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I hope you'll join our community for more stories of resilience and redemption. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your presence here means more than you know. Just a reminder, while this story contains fictionalized details for privacy and storytelling purposes, the lessons about family, protection, and choosing what truly matters are as real as they come.